cool bag.
You know,
It's a scene from England?
It's Liberty's department store.
Oh,
Remember Liberty's?
vaguely.
Yes, remember the incredible prints that they used to, yes.
Yeah. Liberties of London, yeah?
Yep.
I do.
I put those there for you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Late 1970s, early 1980s. That's how long I've had
Oh,
this.
wow. It's in good shape. Here's our committee.
Oh, we still got 5 minutes.
What's going on with this rain, Brandon? Why did you bring us this
Sorry,
rain as
yeah.
staff of the city?
You're gonna have to submit that in writing. In triplicate.
Live
I
here,
don't get it.
You have a little tent outside?
Yeah, I do. Actually, no, it's in my office. My office is crazy right now because you guys probably saw the construction.
What are they doing?
What's going on?
Well, it turns out that corner of the building, when they built this building, doesn't have a proper foundation under it. So it's that wall, that retaining wall that looks like it's just actually a planter, was built as an actual retaining wall. So it's been slumping. It's been pulling apart. So that's an emergency repair we got on the capital improvement plan. So they're ripping all that planter out, they're putting in a new foundation underneath, so my office doesn't fall into the parking lot.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really loud. It's
There's
really
probably
loud.
some,
Yeah, I bet.
some steering committee directors that are probably together. Thank you.
Okay, the vice president's on this side.
Yeah.
You got it.
Hello.
Hi, Neil.
Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's us again.
Ta-da. The reunion.
Yeah.
After not meeting for
Did
so
you
long.
guys?
No.
No?
I finally at 10:30 decided I better get myself organized. Then I couldn't find all my notes from the last number
Oh,
of meetings.
good grief.
Well, I finally found them, but I was like, oh my God.
Oh, papers. Is that David? It is. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Victoria,
Yes, ma'am.
I also did not sign the list of names of the people I have.
Oh.
I've been carrying around for the last.
Oh, it's good to remember.
Yeah, so could you send me the
Somebody
names
said-
again, and I can, next time I see you, I'll give it to
Well,
you.
why don't I just write it down right now? Can I do that?
Well, of course you can.
Do you
Then
want
what
all
do?
4 names?
Yeah, and then what I'll do is I'll give it to you at the end of the meeting.
Okay. I was hoping you would know.
I'm David.
David.
O'Neill.
Ah, yeah. Okay, okay. I follow most of them online.
Find out the
Good.
second here.
Good. That's wonderful.
Yeah, video streaming is great.
It is so convenient.
It's not bad, it doesn't really, I can't stay the whole thing. So it's just long enough. It's like 1 hour, then maybe this is.
That's right.
You can always leave here early.
Dealing with asphalt, irrigation.
It's in there.
Yeah, what about asphalt?
Hello. Asphalt in the right of way? Yeah,
Very
it's
good comments, Janice.
right here. It's the name. So this is father, mother, 2 sons.
Oh, 2 sons.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Everybody thinks Nikita is a female name, but it's actually a Nikita Khrushchev
Yeah.
boy's name, mostly.
Also,
Not the same as you. My right foot's going. What is it about being old? Just always
we
something.
talked about the percentage of writings on site.
Yeah.
And we need to finalize what we think about skylights. None in the right of way, but also it should clearly state none in back neighbors.
Yeah.
Privacy in the morning.
Yeah.
Hello.
Good morning.
Welcome, welcome. Good to see you.
There's no unit.
I mean,
Do you know Roberta?
yes, I do.
Oh, you
I know
do?
two.
Okay, wow. I only knew one growing up. She just called me Roberta again.
No. I have a ruse called hardcore.
Oh, yeah, I'm all over this already, actually. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I have not, well, that's an announcement I'll make. I have not updated anything to anybody's notes. This is still the old, just old, like, trying to make it concise with no input.
No precedence.
Yes, it's in the first paragraph.
Okay, so we need to emphasize it someplace else, because people can completely off the radar.
I know. It looks like it's 9. Oh, wait, we don't have it on.
Where's John?
Hello.
It's so good to see you. Oh, I'm sure. Are your feet really on the ground? You know for sure.
As much as they ever are.
Yay, it's Dawn.
We're done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I grabbed it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so they wanted to put like new signs on the building and the whole thing. I was like, unless you want to, I mean, you gotta go to the planning commission first. And it's a use permit for a new business, and it's a different owner, so the different owner's gonna have to sign the use permit. I mean, that little building is entitlement to be used as part of the restaurant, as like overflow dining or like part of the dining room, which they can do that if they want. They can serve wine in there. I don't care. On their menus, they can call it the wine room, but they can't have signage. They can't advertise it as a new restaurant. Yeah, I've been back and forth with Greg quite a bit about that one. Yeah, but it's what it is.
Do we have a Zoom room today, Brenda?
You should.
Invisible Zoom room?
Looks like we're up, yeah, it's up there.
Is anyone in it?
Uh,
I'm not confused.
there you go.
Yes, there we go. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Long time no see.
Morning, guys. We're gonna get started.
Here we go. It's a good turnout. I'm trying to figure out if there's a turnout in the Zoom room also, but
Janice. Janice, we're gonna get started.
is there a, can we get the grid up there?
Joel, can we show up on the screen, please, in the chambers, the, like, participants that are on with us? Is that possible?
Thank you. Ghost in the machine. Okay, so we have a microphone difference today. Apparently we have to distribute it around. We only have one mic, so it's just a little bit.
We're gonna call it the talking stick.
The talking
so
stick. It's
when
just a
when
corporate.
it's time for you to talk, we'll pass the talking stick to you.
Okay. So, oh, good.
Thanks,
Look at
Joel.
wow, this is a good turnout today. It looks like. Thank you for everybody for coming.
We're having too much fun.
Yes, that's right. So calling to order, I see that everybody is here on the committee and we have a nice turnout in the room. We're going to just start with public comment on non-agenda items. We have, as you know, gone through the entire thing once, the residential and commercial, just to sort of pick up issues and make small corrections. So now that we're just, right now is a chance, since we've done that, to just talk about anything else that people have in mind. We know we're here for a low, to go back to the guidelines, but any other things on folks' minds that are not on the agenda today? Melanie?
Well,
Oh, hold on, Melanie's got her hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I'm really kind of surprised at the agenda today. I thought we were going to be meeting with the Planning Commission, or at least try to. No?
No.
Do you care to comment?
I can if you want me to.
Sure.
I don't know why the assumption was that we were going to meet with the Planning Commission. I did have a conversation via email and then over phone with the chair and the vice chair, but were you looped in on that conversation as well, Melanie? Why did you think we were meeting with the Planning Commission today?
Because I thought we discussed it at some point. Mentioned
No.
we might.
No, we're going to have a community meeting, but no, this is the steering committee. I spoke with the chair of the Planning Commission, and he agreed that the Planning Commission will get their chance with this. This is really about getting feedback from the steering committee and the public in this forum, and then we will have a community meeting at some point, like we've discussed with the Planning Commission, and the City Council can come, and the bigger community that can't meet in the mornings during the day. But no, to my knowledge, there was never any agreement that we were going to have the Planning Commission at this meeting.
No, I didn't say agreement, I thought that we were gonna do it, I thought, so, maybe we would get together.
Oh, well, there will be a community meeting with the Planning Commission in the not too distant future. I don't. We've sort of slowed, and the question was, do I have an idea of when that's going to happen? I don't, because we've sort of slowed this process. We took 5 meetings over a month and a half period to go through, and did some really good work. It's really drawn out the schedule, so I don't have a time for that yet. We were supposed to, yesterday at City Council, we were going to go and share this with the City Council. What I'm pointing to when I say this is the sort of redrafted brevity edits. We were supposed to share that with City Council and get their feedback. Unfortunately, that didn't make it onto the agenda. The mayor moved that to next month, just because of what was on the agenda last night. Went till about 9 o'clock last night, so you were there for a lot of it. So we'll meet with the City Council next month. That'll be on the agenda, and also the conversation about the Design Review Board will go then as well. So it's kind of just the schedule is drawing out, but it's so we can do work.
And Neil, were you going to say something off agenda? And then you're going to have this mic. Hold on.
Let's do this.
Yeah.
Hold on, Neil.
I won't be able to stay for more than about 40 minutes, so I thought this would be the only opportunity to say this. And I'm not trying to be inflammatory, and I'm not trying to create fights and wars between people. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to stand up for the residents of Carmel. That's it, the residents of Carmel, above all other interests and sources. So this is a letter I wrote that was never published. Recently, while listening to several meetings and debates on the subject of modern versus traditional architectural styles, I noticed something I had not noticed before. Some argued for more free expression in their architectural designs, implying we should allow modern style architecture in Carmel.
No, I'm sorry, this is on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you don't have to, I'm sorry, we can try to get it to it early.
Oh, okay.
This is not an off-agenda item.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
And so the chair made Neil aware that this was not on this is on the agenda, so it's not a non-agenda item for discussion.
Thank you, Brandon, for using the mic properly. I think we're all going to have to learn from Brandon. Okay, so anything else off the agenda? I don't see anything in the Zoom room. Okay, so we're going to move on from that one. Any update on past action items? This is kind of, you actually, this is, oh, did someone have their hand up? I heard some noise. Okay. Announcements and updates on any past action items. This was just a moment to sort of, we didn't really take minutes for the note-taking on the last draft, so just if there's any other thing we want to go back to that to review, things that maybe needed following through with, or any other announcements from the committee. This would be the time for that. Anybody? Maybe nothing? Okay. Good, we're moving right along. Brandon, do you have anything you want to update us on?
Sure. I think I can give a brief update. So it actually sort of dovetails what I was saying earlier and speaking with Melanie, that because we have been focusing so much on the brevity edits and all that, the Nori winter work on the draft at least has sort of been on pause because we've been waiting for this to get finished and then go into City Council. But sort of in the background, we as staff with Nori have continued to work on some of the other things like refining what we would call it, the building envelope, or we originally were calling it bulk plane, but the building envelope, refining that so we can bring that back for presentation. and little things like that. But really the focus has been here in the steering committee. So the outside staff work has been focused on other priorities like housing and other projects that we're working on. So we've been focusing on this. So not too much else to report on that.
Can you say a little more about the building envelope? I'm excited that you're bringing that up, and just, I want to ask you if it's both commercial and residential, or can it be if it isn't?
Right now, and that's what we'll bring back to have a conversation about. We're realizing as we're going through the exercise that it may not make the most sense in the commercial district. There may be a better way to approach it. It certainly makes sense, and we think will be very useful in the residential district. But just given how the commercial district is constructed, it may be better done with words versus form. So we'll bring that conversation back to the group. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Doug.
What's the status of the landscape ordinance?
That's a great question. So I think I mentioned it last time. So we're endeavoring to update the city's forest management plan right now with Davie Resources Group. They have the capacity and the ability and the technical wherewithal to do a landscaping ordinance for us. I think that does make the most sense also because they're doing the forest management plan, because we all talked about how those dovetail with each other. So right now I'm waiting on a quote back from them for what it's going to cost to do that. But I think that that's going to be our best bet, because it does overlap with the forest management plan. And as I mentioned before, we did spend some time working with Bernard Trainer and his group trying to come to some sort of agreement, but the scope and budget didn't work out. Their schedule is very busy, and for them to be able to help us out, it just wasn't something we could pull off financially at the city level, because we just couldn't.
David?
I just have a question in regards to outsourcing. Is it possible that we can use volunteers from the community to do projects like this? Because there are so many people that have really excellent skills, background, education to handle these things. Could we put it out and ask if there are people who wanted to create a committee to do the landscape ordinance?
It's an interesting proposition. I don't really have an answer for you in this moment. We would want to use somebody that has, actual licenses and degrees and all that stuff. So if I was pressed to make a decision right now, I would say no, because I don't know who we're talking about. But it's certainly something we can talk about, or maybe, getting some folks from the community who are interested in landscaping involved with the professional that the city hires. Maybe that's another way to do it. But I don't have a concrete answer for you right at this moment.
Thank you. Good questions. Anyone from Zoom? Oh, this is still the staff update, though. But if there's any questions, because we're going to move on to the meaty part of the meeting, which I think was clear in the announcement from staff that we're going to now, having done a first pass at the entirety of the residential and commercial codes, that all of us had sort of noted and tabled larger issues that we just didn't want to take care of quickly. We wanted to spend a little more time on. I want to also just mention just so we're all on the same page, that the condensed or briefer version of the original first draft is still the same version. March 9th is the first time that we saw just a very condensed, sort of cleaned up, shorter copy. And even though we have met for 5 different times and taken copious notes, Brandon and I and others, that has not been incorporated in. So sometimes you might know, especially if you're new to the discussion, you might notice, I'm not sure I like this wording, or I wonder if this oops, did that cut out for a second? It may have already been taken care of. So that's just something, that's why we're going to focus. It doesn't mean it has been. You can always submit thoughts, you can flag things, but we're just going to try to concentrate on these larger issues today, keeping in mind that what you're looking at is not on purpose, not updated until we have this larger discussion. Does that make sense to everybody, I hope? Okay. So we have, if you all got this list, which also exists up on the table, says Brandon, there is a sort of grouping here of things that, even though they have design elements or design guideline crossover, sometimes might entirely or sometimes entirely or partially be taken care of in the zoning code. That doesn't mean we shouldn't weigh in on them in order to give guidance to how we might handle it in the zoning code, but that's where you see the C. It's code related. And then something that, at least, you know, by our judgment, looks like it's primarily going to be taken care of on the guidelines is a G. I don't know. I know there's some folks here. Neil said he needs to go early. Anyone else need to go early today? Eric?
Would it be okay if I add just a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Because you and I talked about this list. And one of the things that the chair and I, this is Brandon, by the way, one of the things the chair and I talked about prior to this is some of these items like, for example, you'll see a C in front of downsizing and preservation incentives. The conversations for this group and this committee is not to necessarily like design or do those incentives, not to create those incentives, because that's a policy call, at the city council level. The conversation on things like that is more, is it a good idea? What should they do? The higher level conversations, not getting into the nitty gritty of creating the policy and the actual incentives. That's something the chair and I had talked about as well.
No, I think that's right. Okay, so 2 folks at the end. Anyone else need to go early who has things they'd like to weigh in on? Okay, so I know that Neil was going to address an item which is basically 5th, you could count it from the bottom, the style issue. Eric, how about you? I'm sorry you don't have the mic, it's going to be hard. Can you scream it? What were you going to, what?
We can say it for you.
Go ahead.
Briefly about a process section, just one item that I know we discussed with Neil and Carol and Ken.
Okay. Process section is something, you're talking about an appendix that might deal with process?
Appendix or a chapter, which I think makes sense as a separate section, which tells you what steps you have to take and what needs to be submitted.
Okay. So a process, okay, so we're talking about the bottom of the sheet. So maybe we'll start at the bottom of the sheet. And Neil, you spoke first, so why don't you go ahead and finish your thought?
We're passing the talking stick.
Sorry. Okay, so I just wanted to read this letter again with apologies, not trying to create bad feelings and fights and so on, you guys, but I've just got to keep going for the residents and for the locals no matter what. And so I've made some observations, and here is what I wrote. Recently, while listening to several meetings and debates on the subject of modern versus traditional architectural styles, I noticed something I had not noticed before. Some argued for more free expression in their architectural designs, implying we should allow modern-style architecture in Carmel. The odd thing was that the request is being made on behalf of the architects, not the residents. Are we fighting for the rights of architects or the rights of Carmel residents? How much of a stake does the architectural profession have in this debate? Modern architecture is not loved universally as we are told it is, even though it is on the cover of so many architectural magazines these days. In fact, in Carmel, we seem to be keeping or exceeding the national and international polls, querying the population and repeatedly finding about a 75-25 ratio preference for traditional over modern. There's an article, nearly 3/4 of Americans are sick of American architecture in the Federalist. There are multiple books and videos on the failings of modern architecture. Quotes, the failure of modern architecture, end quote, is a good start. Not all architectural styles are equal. Do we want brutalism and deconstructivist styles in Carmel? Don't feel badly about not liking modern style. It turns out you may be in the majority. Christopher Alexander, first architect to receive the AIA's Medal for Research in 1972, said this on the inside cover of his book, Pattern Language. Quotes, "At the core of these books is the idea that people should design for themselves their own houses, streets, and communities. This idea may be radical. It implies a radical transformation of the architectural profession, but it comes simply from the observation that most of the wonderful places of the world were not made by architects, but by people," end quote. In this debate about architectural styles that contributes to Carmel's character and those that don't, motivation matters. Architects might be motivated by reputation and creative expression, property and business owners by profit, but the residents are motivated by their love for the beating heart of Carmel, and that should make all the difference. And that's it.
Okay, so what Neil has done is started to address, in the second group of all the guideline-related things, issue star number 5. Should we, in this document, address style or not address style? That is something that was raised by one of our community members at an earlier meeting, and we put it on this larger issue list. It would be a significant change potentially to these guidelines to eliminate the notion of regulating style as a way to not take a side is one way to look at it in this. So I want to open up the floor, since Neil has started us off in that direction, to others on this and see if we can reach some kind of consensus about what we think about addressing style in this document. Marianne.
Can I first briefly just respond to the letter? I want to point out to Neil that architects have actually no say per se, because a painter can just paint whatever they want, because it just they only have to buy a paint and a canvas. Writers can just write whatever they want because they only need paper and a piece of and a pencil. We are actually dependent on clients, and we need to build what clients want, because otherwise we have no business. So it's not that architects can just build whatever they want to build, because it's the clients who pay for that. So if there is some architects building contemporary projects, it's because there are clients who want it. And so it's not architects just creating their stuff. Without clients, we can't create stuff, right? So you are probably, or the statistics that you read, let's just assume for a moment that they're correct. Then there's 75% of people who want traditional architecture and 25% of people who want contemporary work. And if we are in a representative democracy, that's how it should be. There should be, you're sitting next to a client of mine who lives in a contemporary house, and that is what Mr. Di Girolamo wanted. And all of my clients, or our clients, probably Eric's clients, come to us for a particular purpose. And if they want very traditional architecture, they go to a different firm. So it's not the architects who, create that. It's the clients, it's the demand that we serve. And those people are also residents of Carmel. So we have a lot of clients that want exactly what you don't want, and they are also residents of Carmel. And I think that also needs to be acknowledged. They are less maybe than the other group, but they are here and they want to live here, and they shouldn't be chased out of town because the majority doesn't want something different. That's actually not how this country works. It's minorities have rights, in all aspects of society. And so with that notion, I think we could continue that discussion, and I am all for not addressing styles in the design guidelines, because I think it's such a charged word. It's very ambiguous. It's very hard to define. So I think if we categorize architecture, I think it's a better way maybe to address that. And I think there's a lot of sort of scientific background, you know, or historic background how to categorize architecture, and not make a style out of it. It also cheapens it, I think. You know, styling stuff is what stylists do that set up homes for sale. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Brandon, when we first met downstairs in April of '22, you were asked if you thought this process would result in any general plan amendments. And I think your answer was no. Have you seen anything thus far, such as maybe compounds and street rhythm, that may require a general plan amendment? No, I'd like it back.
Maybe I'll give it back. You know, that's a really good question, Doug, because we've gone down deeper rabbit holes than I think we all thought we would go down back in April of back then. I don't want to commit to that at this moment, but some of these things, they're definitely general plan adjacent, and I think that's something we need to consider.
So the reason I'm asking is for structural, following along what Mary Ann had said. I think there are some items that are going to need general plan amendment. Style would be one of them, because the general plan now has two policies that talks about a variety of architectural styles. So if we're going to have general plan amendments, and that's not one of the items listed here, it only talks about code and guideline, I think our guideline should be pure to be consistent with the general plan that exists. But if the committee's recommendation is that we have a style reference or compound reference, that we have a codicil that we send to the council that identifies what those issues are. But I'm not comfortable adopting guidelines that are contrary to the general plan.
I just want to draw folks' attention. If you have a draft of the residential briefer version in front of you, on page 11 is where this is dealt with. In number 4, retain and build upon Carmel's architectural heritage, 4.2.0 says continue Carmel's tradition of diversity in architectural styles. And I think Doug is referring to language that's similar in the general plan and in other documents. And there's enough, there's some smaller comments about being authentic to a historic style if you elect to build in a historic style. And having the same quality level for other styles. So we can use a different word potentially. This is what Mary Ann is bringing up, historical, architectural categories. But Doug is raising a new point, which is that it actually is embedded very deeply, not just in the guidelines, but throughout our documents. And maybe that's enough to move on to the next topic, possibly. I don't know. Does anyone else have a thought on this issue, which I thought was, I forget who raised it a long time ago, but we thought it was a very interesting idea to consider removing the style debate. I'll be like an Oprah figure.
I know. Thank you. I guess I have a couple of things to say about it. One is that I guess after the last meeting, we had a chance to meet with Carol and Neil, and under the auspices of Mr. White's wonderful Craftsman home, and had some discussions about this. And there was, at a point, I think we came to an understanding that there wasn't disagreement about, modernism versus traditional styles. I would advocate for what has been said already, that style should be basically taken out of the guidelines itself, because I think those are can be independent and they transcend style in so many ways. And I think in terms of the stylistic debate, even what we talked about, I thought there was some maybe confusion, or just we didn't see eye to eye about even the definitions of what modernism in Carmel should be. I think I brought up the example of going onto the Carmel Preservation Association's website. There is a photo of the Walker House, and I think in there you mentioned how this is actually not modern, and a lot of people would, including probably Wright himself, would disagree with that. Yet that's something more palatable because of the natural materials, the way it integrates with, obviously the site is one of the most masterful examples of Wright's work. And that's modernism too. And I think if the idea is to push, as an example, push Carmel architecture and homes to that more site-oriented, naturalistic materials and scale in town, then I don't think we'll have that many arguments. And I think that's what the keeping style out of the guidelines itself can do. So that would be one of the things I have to say. The other thing in terms of style is that I think, and this goes to what I don't know if you want me to bring up what I was thinking about in terms of the photo, documentation for the guidelines, which I'm kind of thinking about looking into, and we have some help from like Ian Martin, who is willing to photograph this stuff. So I have put some thought into it, and I produced a general outline which we can share. It's very rough in a draft, but I think it is a good idea in the document, probably more as an appendice to the main text, but to really, if someone from another town comes in, looks at this document, they can go to the back and they can see what we mean by Carmel. They can see the best examples of the different houses and homes, and as well as commercial architecture. And I thought one of the ways to do it is a connection to the historic context statement, which does address historical styles. And so one of the issues with the context statement and the documents as they are now on the website, for example, is that there's really not good photo documentation of all these great homes. They see these, you can go to the DPR pages and they're black and white and you can't really see them. But someone from out of town that wanted to look at that really doesn't get a sense of our community. So by doing this in a more rigorous way with much better photography, you can talk about the existing styles of the town as part of the heritage. That was one of the, I thought in the draft you produced, the concise version, the brevity version, there was a discussion of continuing architectural heritage of the town. And one way to do that is to really document these different styles, like the vernacular, the storybook, the Spanish colonial, Monterey colonial, there's French revival, there's Italian revival, American colonial, craftsman, minimal traditional, the Comstock post-adobe, Carmel Ranch, post-war modern, Wrightian organic. This is coming directly from our context statement and the updated context statement. Regional expressionist style of Henry Hill, for example, and Bay Region modern. So those are, I think, by putting that into appendix of the text, and then, of course, using probably some of those would be great examples to discuss the principles that are in the guidelines. So some of those photos or pieces of those photos could be part of the guidelines text themselves. So I think keeping the general guideline text clean of specific styles is fine, but we obviously want to discuss our heritage. And you can do that, I think, by doing it this way.
I just want to follow up with what Eric's saying. Again, back to 4.20, where we say continue Carmel's tradition of diversity in architectural styles. There's not that much written about it. It's basically about being true and having high quality reproduction. If you're going to do a mission revival, let's say, that you do it well. So I'm just going to ask the group, and Eric, maybe you can start. How would we revise this if we wanted to eliminate the style? So bottom of page 11, if we wanted to eliminate it just in this document, how would we get to these issues of quality and accuracy in our architectural heritage? Do you have any thoughts about that, or anyone have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think one of the issues which I thought was important that Doug brought up was the consistency with the general plan and talking about diversity. So the word style, I don't think has to be stricken from the document, but it needs to be understood as a way to understand the diversity that's out there in Carmel. So I'm not so sure. I mean, I'll look at this again, but I think discussing doing things authentically, which is part of the documents, I think we all would agree is very important.
And what about diversity? Is there a way to talk about diversity without focusing on style?
Of course.
Okay.
I mean, I think diversity has a lot to do with, and I think I had brought this up, I think when I was kind of going through some of the examples of, I think there was, I forget the section 3.4 maybe, where it talks about really trying to keep diversity along a block, which is really important to the character of Carmel. But there's specific parts of this that talk about
Vary the design of a new building from that of nearby and
abutting properties, yes. And there's so many examples, like the Comstock District, for example, where there's stylistic and material connections between the grouping of homes there, which are really important. And so just saying you can't have a Comstock next to a Comstock didn't seem to make sense to me. But what is diverse in that is they're not cookie cutter plans. Each one is designed for the specific site. They're actually thought about as a landscape together, and connecting landscapes. I believe when it was built, the neighbors had paths through the yards, linking them up. And so it's really important to have the diversity such that you're not having, for example, and it's discussed in cookie cutters, and for example, it's discussed in the guidelines, having diverse setbacks along a block so that you can tell the plans are different. I have this example, because part of it, a photo review of things is showing the bad examples, which we try to keep maybe out of the city limits, but there's this example, which is, I can show it around. This is on Carmel Point. It's probably familiar to a lot of people. They're basically the same plan. They're 3 houses built in a row, and they are materially different. They are stylistically different, but the plan is basically the same. So it looks like there's no diversity along that within those 3 because there's no interest. There's not individuality between those 3 buildings. So that's one way I think it really is different from style. Yeah, that's sort of diversity.
Thank you, Eric. So I just want to make sure again that we get a kind of sense of the room for this 4.2. And does anyone else have like thoughts about? Oh, thank you, Carol. Just as I'm here.
Yes, I have lots of thoughts, and I'll try and express them. First, Marianne's point about people come and want what they want, and that you are working for them. I really understand that. I think, however, and that's true, I think, in most communities. I just think in Carmel that we are special, that we are different, and that's what part of the draw to Carmel is. And I think of all the wonderful places in the world that I have been that are so unique and have such strict guidelines in terms of what people can and cannot do. And if they want to build a house that doesn't look like the character of that village, then they build it somewhere else. I know that sounds so un-American, but in reality, that's how we have remained such a special character in Carmel here. And so in that sense, I think majority rules rather than everybody kind of being able to do what they want. In terms of the style issue, I had submitted a large page of characteristics that seemed consistent with Carmel's style, and as potentially as an appendix or as part of the document, depending on what people thought. And I thought that pretty much, and it was a number of us putting that together, not just me, pretty much characterized what makes Carmel Carmel. And so I would like to remind Victoria in particular that exists. So whether we say style or don't say style, I think what's most important from my perspective anyway is that we keep within the character of Carmel based on those kinds of characteristics that were delineated. So That's all for right now.
Sorry to be over your shoulder like that, but let me give someone else quickly. Eric? All right. Hold on. But then I'm going to someone.
I agree with Carol. I think that's that there is an importance of keeping the character Carmel, and one of the importance of not using style as a mechanism is that, and I think we probably agree, there's probably a lot of houses that are done in different traditional styles, like, for example, the ones I passed around are traditional styles, that are not in character with Carmel. And so by, just saying, okay, if you can't do modernism in a certain way, which may be fine, you sort of allow an open door for a lot of the other buildings that may not be appropriate for Carmel either, in terms of scale, in terms of authenticity, and that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot we agree on, put it that way.
I agree. We have a lot to agree on. I'm going to Marianne next. Sorry. She hasn't spoken in a while.
My question would be, Carol, what do we do? We have about 25 to 30%. I really would like to get the exact number, but of homes in Carmel that are modern homes, modern meaning mid-century or after. What do you suggest we do with those?
Leave them until they fall apart.
And then we can't. So the house burns down. What you're saying, a Henry Hill house burns down. We have to put a storybook house instead onto the property. Is that sort of where we are going, is my question. Carmel has just such a rich heritage of, for example, Henry Hill and Mark Mills and other really prominent architects aside from Frank Lloyd Wright that have built here that some people really treasure. So what are we going to do from here on out if that's a banned style, so to speak?
Back to me, please. Okay, so we're way off topic. I hate to say it. The topic is not the age-old debate, which I think is very fascinating. I would love to sit here all day and do that, but it is whether or not to eliminate this terminology. And if we eliminate this terminology, what do we replace it with? If there are ideas about that in particular, I want to address that. If there is no thought on it, really, because it's daunting, and there's no way that we can address things like having the materials and craftsmanship that reflect a particular historic, you might say, category, that might take care of it. But if there are a number of concepts here in 4.2.0 that are, I think, important to this community, that have to do with authenticity and choosing or being true to the character that you have chosen to build your home in. If maybe we can talk about architectural character. Maybe that's a way to do it. But if we can't come up with anything other than style, then my proposal would be we would leave it. Not that I want to leave it. I don't want to, this is not my view. I'm just looking for ideas that we can reach a consensus on. Yes, Brandon, you want to weigh in?
Thanks, Oprah. I'm wondering if maybe we're going about this the wrong way. What if we focus more on defining what we mean when we say style, and then we don't have to rip it out everywhere, and we can just define, that may be a difficult conversation too, but maybe we take that approach for a minute and see if we can talk about what do we mean when we say style.
Will you start us?
Oh gosh, I'm just the idea guy. Well, I guess where I'm coming from is it seems like the debate is style specific to, is it limiting styles and allowing only certain styles, or when we say style, do we just mean all those other words that we were saying, the architectural, cataloging or character, maybe we can draw that out and create a definition of what we mean by style so that it doesn't create confusion throughout the whole document. Because I think that's what's going on, is that in the different sections, 4 and 5 and 6, I think style is throwing a monkey wrench in, because people are saying, I don't know what you mean by style here, but if we create that definition right at the beginning.
Maybe one option is to just go back to the headline, because it clearly says retain and build upon Carmel's established architectural heritage, and we all agree on that, right? And it's actually the historic context statement that defines our architectural heritage. Part of that architectural heritage, do we have that by any chance? Then we could actually see. Yeah, that because if we just say, okay, this is our headline, we just refer back to that. Are we all in agreement with that historic context statement? Then we can just build on that. That's what is established. This is what everybody had agreed on. Our architectural heritage, and then you can build on that. That's exactly what this says, right? And we can use the same language.
Thank you. This is David. What I would do if I was in a position of trying to argue one side or the other is I'd go to the definition as Brandon was suggesting. And I'm wondering if we can agree on this. A style defined as a distinctive appearance, typically determined by the principles according to which something is designed, design or make in a particular form. So I don't know, does that raise any red flags?
It's just that I wonder if the word style is now a loaded term, and if within the architectural community, style tends to be used in terms of a Mediterranean style, English style, modernist style. In fact, modernist, I think, is a misnomer, because you can't say that every building built after 1920 is all the same style, even there. But I think those are loaded terms that have very specific meanings to a community. And so if we want to if we want to disambiguate a little bit, I think we need to come up with a different word to use and then apply a definition to that. I think trying to redefine existing words with existing accepted meanings is dangerous. So if we said characteristics, and then we defined what makes Carmel character and what is that, I would agree with that. But I'm wary of using a word that is going to mean something different to a large community of people, especially those who would be experts.
Okay, I'm liking we're going in the right direction now. I think we're on topic. And so let me propose something, and then we can try to wordsmith this even more now, or we can leave it for now. But let's see if we agree on this direction. So as Marianne pointed out, the main 4.0.0 does not mention style. Retain and build upon Carmel's architectural heritage. We have the word established in there, but that was under debate. 4.2.0, we could rephrase it to say continue Carmel's tradition of architectural diversity, period. Now, that may be controversial because some here, I think, and that is a debate I do not think we will resolve. I think there are some folks in this town who want to pick a style, and there are communities in the world, by the way, that have one style. Solvang is one of them. Seaside in the panhandle of Florida, I don't know if folks are familiar with that. It's all like kind of Key West or Florida style. You cannot deviate from that style, although my former teacher built a very interesting modern building in the town square, and that was an exception. It has a barrel roof. Anyway, that is a style-driven, and by the way, that community was built all at the same time with a style book. That's how that was designed. I would argue this community was not designed that way. Now, we might make a turn in the road and say that if there was I think you'd have to take a referendum. I think it would have to be a legal referendum where you say, even though this town has a heritage of architectural diversity and was built by artisans on separate lots, we no longer want it to be that way. So we are going to take a referendum and change the law so that we now have like a plan book or something like that. That would be, because the types of communities that are monochrome style were planned as one. I don't think there's an exception to that. They were from the same moment, they came up at the same time. Were you going to say something else, David? Okay, good. Yeah.
It's just that where I've seen that happen is where, you go in the Southwest, there's an Adobe town, everything was Adobe, it's always Adobe, it was the history of Adobe, so they got a rule, everything's got to be Adobe. That's not us. Our heritage is one of diversity. We have had modernist homes here for many, many, many years. I live in a modernist home. It's a historic modernist home. And it's a unique style just from this area, nowhere else on earth. It's not a knockoff from some other place that's transplanted here. It's from here. It is our heritage. And so I would argue, if you love Carmel, this is Carmel. If you look at the historic context statement, that is Carmel's heritage. If you don't like Carmel and our heritage, then maybe move to a different town or pick a different town to live in, because that's who we are and that's where we live. Now, I don't like a lot of stuff that's new and coming, and I think that we need to define the character of those rules. But I think we need to be careful about trying to become an HOA. We don't need an HOA here. Carmel, people didn't come here because they want a lot of rules. We want the appropriate level of diversity that's respectful to our town. And I think that we can do that. I don't think it's that hard. I think there's work. Now we have to think a little bit more about what does it mean to fit into Carmel versus not. But just a bunch of same houses is not going to be what it is. And I do have a question for the group, which is, if we continue, if you read the historic context statement, I'm blanking out on the exact words when you were reading the rules we were talking about, but it was something about continuing our historic character, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Carmel architecture has been evolving and changing since its inception. And so if you put a lockdown at some point, you are stopping that process. And so I think we need to be careful about saying anything that would stop that process. We're a growing, living town. We're not a museum.
Okay, we're away from the phrasing again, but that's okay. I'm not trying to, critique anyone. Brandon has a thought, and I want to say real quick before I pass the mic, I think it's possible, if I look at 4.20, I will say, to me, for if I were thinking about wordsmithing this so that we get what David said earlier, not this last comment, but about the loadedness of the term style and almost the flippancy with which we use it. Like, it means something to some people that it means something else to other people. And I think it's possible that just getting away from that term and substituting other terminology might work. That appealed to me as a sort of, when I'm asking about the wording here. Now Dawn's going to speak. Is that okay? Okay, hold on.
I think we're, in the broad view, kind of the custodians and the guardians of Carmel's heritage. I agree totally with the heading 4.0. 4.2, and I think that's consistent with what Eric is saying. Just strike the word styles. Diversity of architecture is encouraged, because that's Carmel. Right. That's all it takes.
Okay, good. Okay, so I think we're heading in that direction. And Brandon, what do you want to say?
My comment was similar to Dawn's. I think that your proposed language about continue Carmel's tradition of architectural diversity. I don't even think those that feel that there shouldn't be modern architecture would disagree with that statement. You guys, Carol even nodded and said, yeah, there is architectural diversity. This doesn't say architectural diversity, but no modern architectural diversity, which includes modern. It's just architectural diversity. So I think that was going to be my comment, is that I think it works either way.
Mm-hmm. So I actually think that, again, if we can rephrase this, style doesn't come up that much in this document, actually. It's really mostly here. And this area is really more about consistency and quality when you choose a direction in what particular aspect of the heritage you're going to build on. And I think possibly we should I want to wrap this topic up. So I want to say that if, and as I said before, all the notes that have been taken by staff and me have not, and whoever else have not been incorporated yet. So we can have we can set out a draft where whatever we take a stab at, including on this issue, can be looked at, of course. I'm going to just look at the Zoom room if there's anybody out there, because it's a nice big group that wants to say anything. I think we best move on. This is one of the more heated topics. Okay, David, one more. Oh my God.
Thank you. I wanted to say something that actually might help us move on. What I'm thinking is this is a very loaded topic for a lot of people, and we're all representing different people in the community, and that's all important. One thing I've been researching is if we can create historic districts, and even that could be historic street in downtown or a historic street with the Comstocks and things like that, so that those environments can stay similar. And the reason why that's important is because as an investor, there's a lot of value to having an area have a certain feeling. And even with the modern feeling, those things affect property values. And I think that for the downtown area in particular, keeping it in a more traditional way is what most people come to Carmel for and expect to see here, and it's important for us to maintain value that way. But maybe if we leave this to like a referendum about whether or not we create historic streets or districts, that might help us move on.
Well, and we also have historic designations and all those sorts of tools already in the hopper. Okay, let's move on to color. Is that okay? Okay, Eric, since you have to go, I will make an exception.
Thank you. Just a last thing on the style issue, which I think you were pointing out at, and maybe we can eliminate the word, but a lot of the guidelines are about this creating a consistent architectural language. So I think what we object to oftentimes is someone who has a Italianate revival on the front and then it's a modern on the back or something that's completely inconsistent. So there has to be consistency within the whole of the structure. So that's staying, then that doesn't necessarily have to be a style question, but it does have to be an integrity question and a consistency of how you actually put things together as an architectural language. Thing I want to go on just quickly is we talked about it at this meeting I had mentioned before between Carol and Neil and Ken and Ian and I, and what I think there was a lot of agreement on was about part of the process. So I mentioned before I thought it'd be really helpful to have a chapter or a appendice that goes directly to the step-by-step things you need to do to walk through this process of getting something approved. And one of the things I thought that would have a real power to it, if we really want these, and it's about what Carol was saying too, about having, I don't want to use the word teeth, but to have a way for people really to pay attention to the character of the Carmel and to what this document is. And it's subtle, but I think if you think about it, it's actually quite important because it brings everything, the character of Carmel and these guideline principles to the front of mind for the designers and for the approval bodies and things, which is to, and this is the suggestion, is to have everyone who submits a plan, maybe track 2, if not track 1, to write a narrative, a text describing how their project is meeting these design principles. And I think by doing that, it's then, I think, becomes very difficult for people who simply, that's not part of their idea about it, would get things approved. They would. I think the tendency by putting it front of mind like that is to design things to pay attention to it. And you could do that in so many different ways. It still leaves open creativity and things, but it does make you think, how do we make this, our particular building, whatever style or whatever we're doing, how is it made consistent with these design principles that, the town has now concluded should be part of the process.
Can I sum it up? Sorry, you have more to say, but I just wanted to make sure people understood your point. I think let me see if I understand it. We've many months discussed here with the group the idea of a checklist so that folks can say, yes, I did respect the forest, yes, I did blend with my neighbors, et cetera. What I think Eric is adding to that, and I like it, doesn't have to be an enormous novel that you write, but something that is a self-written assertion as to how you're meeting each of those things. A narrative assertion. Here's what I was thinking about. Here's how I met this checklist item, so that people don't get in the habit of just going, yes, of course, I did that, et cetera. So I personally like that idea.
there may be different interpretations of how they address some of these things, which could be stated, and then that could be debated with the planning commission or whoever. But it makes it at least intentional and conscious of what they're doing. So that was a thought. And no, it doesn't have to be a large, many-worded document, but it is a little more than just a checklist, because you have to actually describe how you're doing something. The other thing I just wanted to bring up is these photos being included in the guidelines and how I'm looking at approaching it. And of course, this is going to be, I would love all the input from everybody about different things. People think meet a certain guideline would be a great photo to put in. And then at some point, of course, whatever goes in the guidelines will be up to larger bodies, and the staff and steering committee and the planning commission and the council in the end can decide what is included. But we'll just give it a shot, because I think right now I think having a more some really quality photos that really describe our town is important for people as they use the guidelines as a tool. So what the basis of it, in terms of the photos that would go with the text of the guidelines, is to really use what we would consider, and again, this is up to debate, but that means we can get a lot of input on this, and I'm sure there's a lot of agreement too, certainly the ones that are historically significant and things like that, but use really the best examples of Carmel architecture to exemplify the design principles we're talking about. And so that's the fundamental thing, is try to get really things you think should be emulated in the town, and whether it's a particular element of a building or maybe how it relates to the site or whatever. And that will take a little time to get those documented. So in terms of the appendices we're thinking about that's basically about the text itself and how we'd go about it. But I think Melanie is working on the preferred material list, and having a real wonderful example of these different materials in photos, I think would be really helpful, rather than just using words. So, great examples of stonework being done in Carmel, great, wall materials like shingles and board and bat and stucco, wood siding, and, different roof materials. If we're including metal roof, show good examples of what we think a good metal roof should be, whether it's, the Wright House and the Bermuda roof or other ones that are of high quality. Good examples of driveways, good examples of garages, including detached garages, elements like fences, landscapes, how one of the principles is talking about how the front yard and the right-of-way come together and mixed, and maybe also some more about preferred plants and tree lists. And then I mentioned, so that would be a preferred material appendice, and then the architectural style, which could be correlated with a historic context statement. We could show what we consider good examples of that. I had mentioned, I think in this meeting, but I've talked to other people about it, is one of the traditions of Carmel, I think, and I think Neil may have misinterpreted kind of what I was saying, but there's this tradition of unique, individual, eccentric expressions of architecture in town that doesn't mean you can do anything, but they're very idiosyncratic and they're very special. And yeah, so this is what I was thinking of doing an appendice of those. And this starts with Comstock and the Tor House, even though that's out of the town. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. This is an example of the Ship House. And it goes all the way through, Mark Mills and people like that. So showing that as part of the tradition and would be good, I think. And then maybe we had talked about doing something about describing particular issues that are maybe confusing in the guidelines, like diversity along the blocks we're talking about. What is the importance of connection and differentiation along a block and between houses, and try to be specific about what the guidelines are looking for and examples of that. So that's kind of the start of what I've been working on. And
you have a handout there?
this is, yeah, we can put it up.
This one's got your note on it.
Okay, we'll take this one then.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
You. All right, thank you, Eric. So Eric is becoming a super volunteer and just working with a professional photographer, and we'll see what comes out of that. And I really appreciate This is, he's talking about like a photo list, basically, for the back of the document, how to dive deeper into some of the things that might not fit in the text. And update some of the imagery that have gotten a lot of pushback on. Go ahead, sorry.
Updating, Mary Ann said also updating the imagery in the guidelines themselves, and that's something we have targeted as its own sort of conversational topic, just going through the whole thing picture by picture and saying yes, no, replace, don't replace. So that's sort of its own exercise. But these are like appendice pictures, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, yes, I think it sounds like it's both. So, yeah, I mean, I know Eric has to go, and so we've skipped, so we're going by who has to go. So first we talked about style because Neil had to go. Eric has to go, and what he has brought up now, what we've touched on is the kind of second to last big star, which is images that communicate clearly and convey design excellence. And basically, I mean, again, we've said this in past meetings, but folks should just submit to this committee, you know, things they see that they think are excellent. And, you know, we're very fortunate to have a professional photographer who has volunteered to retake, so we don't have to be nervous about our own photography skills. But if you see something that's like, oh yeah, that's the quintessential craftsman style building in town, you know, go. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's no reason not to crowdsource this, right? I mean, there's always, you know, and it doesn't, you know, we can't have any ego in it. If our picture isn't picked, that's okay. But just to sort of get the ideas flowing, if you see something beautiful, David has some beautiful gates and walls and stuff. So seriously, so that's what Eric is touching on. The other thing he's touching on is, it's actually not here, but Brandon was wanting feedback, and so was I, about additional appendices, if any. So this kind of is a background context, you could argue, but really I think we're talking about maybe adding a kind of photo, like an issues photo appendix, where, for example, if it's difficult to, if you need multiple images to describe better examples of, as Eric was saying, you know, how front yards should communicate with one another, or the idea of diversity along a block that is not stylistic diversity, but true diversity, that kind of thing. So it's almost like an issues.
There could be references in this.
Yeah, and then you would link to it.
A million pictures
right.
Here, you could say, go see the photo appendix.
Yeah.
Regarding this.
And kind of because there'll be the historic thing that also Eric mentioned, so which is based on the historic context statement, just so people can refer to these different architectural languages that we have. I love the word language. That was a good moment. Thank you, Eric. I like the hive brain. I knew something would come out of it. Language, heritage, these things. So that would be, I think, in the background context appendix. Is somebody from the Zoom room weighing in? So now we're talking about, to answer your question to me that you had to me on the phone, Brandon, is maybe this is another appendix here. Okay, so yes, please, go ahead.
So Eric brought up the idea or the concept of the sort of checklist, and I'm happy to say actually the notes that I have from way back ago when we were talking about this checklist was that all those, like the 1 through 6, were not just a checklist. It was, you have to write. Oh, okay, good. So I think we're already going down that road anyway. So that's what we're planning on building. So I think that's a great idea.
Good. Okay, reinforcing that idea. Okay, now that we've gone onto this appendix topic, I don't know if folks have that in front of them. I'm now adding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm adding a 5th one. So we have this sort of historic context, which we've always had. We wanted to add on the natural history piece of it that Melanie had volunteered to work on. This species and materials appendix is something new, the preferred one. This thing that Brandon just said about the checklist appendix and the now with a narrative component.
That's just part of the application package.
Oh, okay. But couldn't it be in the appendix? That doesn't matter, probably. Go ahead. Sorry.
I wouldn't. I mean, as far as an appendix, the way an appendix, the way I think is supposed to work is it's a reference tool from inside. So you use it as a reference from inside the document. The checklist we're talking about is like when you show up and submit an application. It's not really an appendix item. It's just it's an application tool, okay. I would say.
All right. So, I mean, personally, I don't really care where it is, but do you want to say something, Melanie? No, you've just got your... Okay. Just, it seemed to me that we've always had the process described in the 25-year-old document, so I just was kind of assuming, I think, that it would be something you could find in the document, but it really doesn't probably matter. But, Melanie, you were having your hand up?
Yeah, I see the checklist as being something separate. I think, my understanding, Eric, correct me, you're talking about process, meaning not the checklist, which is, from my point of view, going by what the rules are and have you complied with those rules. What you were talking about was a process where you delineate how you go through this design traditions process, the design traditions plan that we evolve, and a real process for telling someone how to easily go through our process in the Planning Commission, etc.
Let me ask the Zoom room, if you're unmute, if the person on whose label is iPad on the Zoom room, if you could just check that you're muted.
How much money you have? I need $3,000.
People in the iPad, mute oneself, please. I think, just to clarify, I believe that Eric was talking about the checklist and having a narrative component to it, whether it's in an appendix or not, a separate document, but also we do need to describe the process, and that is an appendix that is designated.
I think you were mentioning, I think in the original document there is discussion of the process, for example, the preliminary site assessment and things like that. I think that should be clear in whether it's appendices or it's another document about how you go about beginning to design a project in Carmel. That should be kind of concise and in one place. So I wherever that is. Yeah. So like Brandon was saying, it's having that narrative as part of that application process is what I'm talking about. And then in terms of the other things, I think, having the history part as part of the document and the prehistory perhaps is important. And I think that probably covers most of it. And that maybe something about how, and this is probably a tricky one to write out, but how is this document supposed to be used? How is the guidelines supposed to be used? There is something in the original document about kind of how you interpret what you're about to see.
Have that in the draft that Nori.
Yeah.
There's still pieces.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
So I feel like I'm always the one that has to say this, but so just as a reminder, there are pieces of the draft that came out in February from Nori that still exist, and I believe will still be incorporated into whatever this final package looks like. So, this brevity section, these were pulled out so we could focus and not get lost in the bigger document that has the history and has the how to use and has some of this process stuff in already. So this is great to keep bringing up that, we want to make sure that those are in there, but bear in mind that the draft that was sent out to everyone back in February does have that stuff in there, so we can reincorporate that once we get through sort of like beating up the guidelines themselves to make them more usable.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on appendices? Because then we can move on off of this is sort of are we on the right track with what we want to have in appendices and just basically related documents, even if they're not attached as appendices? Okay. So, and we also tackled the images thing. If anyone has any thoughts on images other than what we've already said, thank you, Eric, very much. But maybe not. I didn't see anyone with their hands up. Okay, so let's work our way back up the page here. It's 10:15. We're doing okay. Color. I think this is a very interesting topic. We don't have in our tradition in Carmel a habit really of regulating color very much, but it has come up recently I think just give context to everybody, some new people here. I think my interpretation has come up because there's been a number of white houses that have been built recently, because it's a thing right now, black and white, with black, high contrast, black trim, white buildings. And sometimes they appear multiple places. They seem to be sprouting everywhere, and it's a thing. So we're having a thought, I think the community's having a thought about, well, if that can happen, maybe something else that is very predominant could happen with color or anything else. So this is how it arose, I believe. So let's talk about the color white. Let's talk about earth tones. Let's talk about the idea of regulating color at all, which we really haven't done much before. The issue perhaps of how you enforce that, since I don't think we have a mechanism for approving a new project, but I don't think changing paint color is something that is currently, like for a longtime owner who's owned a building for 20 years, if they decide to paint their house, that's not a permit thing, is it, Brandon? Oh, it is?
Technically in the zoning code, the way the zoning code is written is that any exterior modifications to a building requires a design study. So the way that we do it right now is that we have a mechanism called a scope of work permit, or basically it's like an over-the-counter where it's like, just come in, show us what you're doing. We'll say, yeah, it's a free permit, basically. It's a no permit permit. So we review it at least to get eyes on it at the administrative level. But when you go through like a discretionary hearing, the planning commission, we do present colors and materials, and they do have to approve those colors and materials. And then when we go and do our planning verifications, we make sure that the correct colors were put on the house. And if they weren't, then we make them change back. So technically our zoning code does require some sort of approval from the city for even paint color. It has not been done that way in the past, but in recent years it has been.
So just for my own education, obviously I'm not aware of this, we're saying there is a very kind of low-tech conversation. If somebody makes an exterior alteration, let's say you have a greenish house and the green has faded and you need to refresh the green. Maybe you're using the same color, maybe it's a slightly darker or lighter shade. Even though it might feel to the owner like maintenance, that owner, you think, should technically by the zoning code come in and say, I'm going to be applying another coat of my green paint. Yes?
Yeah, that's the technical black and white reading, but we try to make it as easy as possible. And to be totally honest, everyone knows how this goes. Like, someone may repaint their house and we may not notice it. And unless somebody calls us and says, hey, these guys repainted their house without a permit, we'll never know about it. That's just the reality of, code compliance. But yeah, technically in the spirit of the law, they should come in and just say, hey, I'm repainting this. Here's the color. I'm verifying that I'm just putting it back exactly how it was. And we say, great, off you go. No charge. It's not, like I said, it's a no permit basically. But our code does require exterior modifications to have some design review.
Okay, I live and learn. So what do we think of that? What do we think of regulating color and how it relates to expression, how it relates to fitting in the forest? I just want to get folks' opinions on that. Oh yeah, sure.
So just for people's education, so the review that happens at any level, at the counter level, the staff level, the planning commission level, the standards we have about color are not as black and white. There's still those terms, the muted colors, the earth tones. So we apply that. We don't, if someone doesn't show up to the front counter and we say, no, green isn't allowed in this town. We don't do that. So we go off of, the policy precedent that's set at the planning commission, things like no highly contrasting colors, the black and white, or, muted earth tone, fits in with the surroundings. Those are the criteria we're using. So that may be something for people to consider in this conversation is, do we want to have more prescriptive color standards, less prescriptive? Are we okay with the current sort of like flavor of how color works in town?
Yeah, hold on. I'm giving you the mic.
Just a question for you, Brandon. So you mentioned that we have guidelines already, and there was a discussion of black and white, which, it's hard to make rules against black and white, I would think. But you mentioned that we already have rules against high contrast. So the black and white houses that people don't like, are they against those rules? Are they okay with the rules? if they're high contrast like that, like I know what some of the ones that people are talking about. Certainly, I've noticed them. What's the, do we need more rules, I guess I'm asking, or are we just not applying what we have?
So I think you'll find that any of those houses that people don't like, the stark contrasting ones, were approved some time ago. In recent, last couple years, the Planning Commission has set that policy, and we've been applying that at all levels. The high contrasting paint colors are not allowed. So because when a project is approved, there's a time arc, right? So if something gets approved at the Planning Commission, you know this really well, then you have to go through your building permit process. You have to maybe do some redesign stuff if you find something. So that could be a year or two from the time that the planning entitlement was granted to when you actually see a building erected. So you got to remember that there's that time lapse. So just because something's getting painted today, it could have been approved a couple of years ago.
So maybe we just have an enforcement issue historically rather than...
Well, I think it was and the comment was maybe we have a historic sort of enforcement issue. I don't know if it's either an enforcement issue or a interpretation issue. It could possibly be that in the past, the Planning Commission, and the staff didn't look at that as a non-compliant color scheme. So it could be also an interpretation here that at the time it was compliant. So now we've, through the series of public hearings at the Planning Commission, who does set some of that policy precedent, now that interpretation is that black and white high contrasting paint colors are not consistent with the design guidelines.
So with some of the homes that have these very odd colors and or color combinations, is there not an option for requesting them to change it after the fact? I mean, paint is a very surface thing. And so is there a path for that? Because there are some homes that are just not okay.
No, we typically, you don't, once something's been approved, you don't go back. There's a thing called estoppel where you get into issues of taking away approvals. It's not something that local governments are usually in the business of. There could have been, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but in general, if the city approves something, we don't go backwards and undo it. And if it was done prior to there being regulations or interpretations, then that's considered, non-conforming, legal non-conforming. So it stays until they change it, in short.
Carol has her hand up. Hold on. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, first, from an earlier conversation, I just want to make clear that I think we have a lot of diversity within our traditional styles. I'm not against diversity in that sense. I'm not talking about making everything the same or making, changes to our restrictions so that everything has to be Carmel stone or whatever. That was not my intention at all in talking about other areas of the world. Okay, so now a question about paint. Like, for instance, on David's Henry Hill house, if someone wanted to paint it a cream color, which would be a travesty, let's assume it wasn't a historic house, and someone wanted to paint it a lovely cream color with brown trim or something that fits in nicely in the forest, but would be a travesty on a house like that. How do we control that kind of thing?
That's a nice question, Carol. I hope we have historic tools, designations. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So this particular house is protected because it's on the Mills Act. So you couldn't do that because of it. That's true. I don't know that you have a mechanism if there's a natural wood shingled house and somebody wants to. Just happened, by the way, on Torrey Street was a wonderful redwood house. It was such a beautiful cabin, and somebody painted it white. And I don't know if you have any ways of regulating that. In the first block, when you go south, so maybe the third home south of 8th Street. Yeah. Really sad.
I know. I felt almost nauseous when someone when you brought up painting David's house.
I know Mary Ann's totally correct that we don't have any regulations that say you can't paint a wood shingle house. I mean, if you can't paint it hot pink, but you can paint it a color that's conforming, and except for those that are designated historic, because then that would be historically, damaging the property. So yeah.
Can citizens other than owners try to get more buildings on the historic? I think that's the case. Yeah, if you want to make a case for a historic, that would be a good use of CPA time. Yeah. Okay. Good. So that's that goes to.
Can I just say something?
Yes. One quick second before I lose my train of thought. Preservation incentives. That's not exactly an incentive, but actually it's a slight variation on that topic, which is up at the top of this list, is can we, it's like citizen, for people who care about historic shingle houses that aren't yet designated, there could be citizen action here, slightly different than the incentive topic. Go ahead, Marianne. Just called you Marianne.
Yeah.
Melanie.
Will you be quiet? Just don't ever say that again. We were talking about that before the meeting. Years ago, when I was on the Planning Commission, we didn't have the questions that have arisen in the last few years about color. It was just muted tones, what was appropriate in the forest in line with the colors of the forest. So brown for dirt, greens, grays, that kind of thing. And I think that one of the most upsetting things to me in more recent times is this horrible combination, in my point of view, of red and white in the forest. If you, black and white in the forest. Red and white would really disturb me, too. I somehow think that color is not being paid as much attention to by the Planning Commission, or maybe even the staff over the counter, as it should be, because now what we have is we're losing a lot of trees. We're losing a lot of upper story as well as understory. And what we're left with are houses. We would never allow these colors downtown because they're called attention-getting devices, because they just stick out. I mean, down in the south, just in the rectangle, you see a particular abuse of this, and also on Carpenter Street. I don't know if any of you have noticed, I'm sure some of you have, about the black and white, 3 dwellings on one lot, and that does not fit into Carmel at all. It does not fit into the neighborhood context. It's totally, to my way of thinking, it does not belong here, that color combination on those buildings. If they were more muted and actually fit with the colors on the street, in the forest, it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be obtrusive. So, intrusive. So, I don't know. I really opt for going with colors that are consistent with the forest. And after all, we are a village in the forest, and the human elements in the forest should be understated, not humanity and all of its affectations being exploited at the the feeling of the forest being subjugated to human eccentricities. It's what I'm trying to say. So that's my 2 cents worth, but no black and white.
Okay, Don?
I've always thought Carmel's been very lucky overall, not having outlandish colors. I think it's a matter of emphasis and enforcement of the muted colors. I think the only single thing we're all talking about we can add is watch out for your neighbor. Avoid 2 houses in a row of the same color.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And then there's one very eccentric one on Mission Street. I'm not quite sure how that happened. That's like purple and orange and green and yellow and everything. So it's I think I'm happy not to have to live next to that one. So we should probably avoid that.
I think that one was part of the last annexation.
So I'm going to throw out something that is completely different from the rest of my community, and I will humbly not assert any, emphasis on this at all. But I do find, like Dawn, that we have been lucky in the sense that I think the tendency for folks is to come here and try to blend in. We also have a colonial tradition of stark white buildings in this town that are sort of New Englandish that I don't think was concerning anyone until this latest rash of this stylistic choice people were making. And that purple and green and orange thing that I drive by sometimes or walk by, I think, I'm kind of glad they're there. It's so strange. I don't want to live next to them either. But there's something about the freedom. We don't have, we have a lot of restrictions here. There was something about the freedom. And by the way, right near my house, there's a collection of old kind of almost camp buildings that are little rentals now. But the red barns, they're beautiful buildings, and they're all red with white trim. And they are historic. They're historic colored. I don't think they're designated historic, but it's part of not a compound, that's the wrong word, but it's part of a collection of original buildings, very lovely, great scale, very modest. Traditional barn red, but a high contrasting white trim. So I'm worried about, somebody's got their hand out. I'm going to go to Cindy in 1 second. Thank you, Nancy. So I personally, and I will not, I'm not pushing this on anyone. I think we should try whatever we want to try with respect to color. It is something that is not permanent. So I feel like it's worth trying things. But Cindy, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I just want to make a comment after Mary Ann had commented on the Mission Street colorful house. That was the home of a woman who had a very high interest in color, and she was very individualistic in her enjoyment of color. And in her very old age, she had her house painted those colors. So when I go by that, I recognize it's completely out of context with the color schemes in Carmel, but it reminds me of her, and I just smile. So I don't think anybody else but she would have done that. And bringing up the barn red houses near where you live, Victoria, that's a family compound of ownership, which I'm sure you know. Mm-hmm. And the barn red is a muted barn. The other thing is, it's in an area where very few people ever see them unless they happen to go down Viscano and then turn onto Flanders and Crespi, so that they're not sticking out in the middle of blocks, where other people are. They do kind of set a statement, and the barn red is more subtle than the bright red. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Cindy. I agree. Here's Melanie.
Thanks, Cindy and Victoria. What I'm talking about is red. I'm not talking about barn red, and I'm not talking against anything that is is a very muted, very soft color. It's not in your face. White in this town, without the trees and without shrubbery and landscaping, is very much in your face, and we've got quite a number of those, and it's become very much of a almost architectural digest thing where everyone decided for the last few years, this is great, this is what we're going to do. And it just shows you the lack of creativity and thought that goes into something, not even considering the forest, not considering the neighborhood or anything. It's just like, I want a white house, And I think it's attention-getting, overly attention-getting, especially in certain locations. I'll just give you one example real fast. On the corner of 13th and Casanova, the northwest side, the people went to a great deal of trouble to do a charming house there. Unfortunately, a number of the larger trees were lost, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. And even the Planning Commission, when the Planning Commission went down to that area, one of them, who had voted for the color, voted for the whole thing, said, "Oh my God, you know, I just think this was a big mistake." And so, you know, it's just being thoughtful, I think, and trying to visualize how something is going to work in the area. And, you know, maybe they could have gotten away with it in an old colonial style, you know, Spanish colonial or Monterey colonial. If it's muted, a little more muted white, but the stark white is something that I'll be so glad when it's out of vogue.
So and Carol's going to speak, and on my way over to her, I'm going to ask, do we all agree about at least limiting a certain color along a block and asking for diversity of color along a block like we ask for diversity of other things along a block? Is that I should do a straw poll. Go ahead, Carol.
I just wanted to mention that, and I agree with Melanie and Cindy, I did used to live right next door to that orange and purple and yellow and whatever house as a child. And so what amazes me is that it's still those colors after all these years. I don't know how that happened, but I just wanted to make that comment.
I think we're all having some nostalgia about that house. Ken?
Well, maybe talk a little history of that house. It appeared. It was done, and people started recognizing that it was so far out of common sense, and they thought the person who had done it was kind of loopy. That's a good word. And so a big kerfuffle in the city. People got raged, talked a lot in coffees and around the back fences and stuff. And finally, when somebody talked to the person, she said, "Okay," says, "you pay for it, we'll repaint it."
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. Okay, so can we do a quick nod around the room, at least Cindy's going to talk in 1 second. Just do people agree that diversity of color along a block is a worthwhile thing to add in? That's a new idea, but we have diversity of everything else along a block. Do we care about diversity of color? Nobody cares. Is it okay if a whole block is green? No? Okay. Well, before we go to that, I mean, just is it something that we're trying to get variety on or not? I'm just asking that question. Yes, says Nancy. Yes, says the committee. Okay.
I'm not sure we have to legislate, though. I'm with Carol. I think we want it, but I think we have to be careful about how many rules we want to make.
Okay, the group is liking the idea for the Zoom room of diversity of color along the block, but may not want to regulate it. Cindy, did you have another comment? Your hand's up.
Yes, it's just
Go
hard
ahead.
it's only hard to nod yes when you're sitting in your house. But I just wanted to say a couple of things. I am against the stark white with the black trim. I'm not in favor of everybody painting their houses multiple colors as the Mission Street house is. I only like it because, I can't say I like it, but I only get a kick out of it because I know the person. But I certainly wouldn't want that all over Carmel or even next to me. I didn't want Marianne to think that I was in agreement that houses should be painted that color. But I think that the muted colors and diversity in a block are going in the right direction, that's all.
Okay, that's a vote for muted colors and diversity along a block. David's got his thumb up. I will take note of the room as you make hand gestures and head movements. That's how I'm counting it. That's how I'm figuring this out. Okay. Muted colors. Okay, well that's Well, that's the next question. And I just want to say one more thing about white. And I am not somebody who would ever paint a house in Carmel white, but we have a number of historic buildings in Carmel that are white, that are colonial architecture usually, that have been here forever, that never sparked this conversation. What do we say about that? Do those folks, for example, when they come in for a permit, have to, because some new owner needs to make some, do they have to then change a colonial building to a muted earth tone color? And why not? And how do we regulate that? David.
Thank you. What I was thinking is that we talk about muted colors or earth tone colors and maybe say not vibrant or something along those lines, except for when it's traditional. So, for example, if somebody was to build a Victorian, a new Victorian and wanted to paint it in, more outlandish colors or something, maybe that would be appropriate for the community. Maybe not. They could still do it in muted colors, but the traditional one in regards to the colonial with the white and black.
Appropriate to style. I hate to use the word, but maybe as appropriate to style.
Or not stark white. I mean, there's so many variations of white. It's not. White is a huge range of color, and so you definitely want something that is not attention-getting, non-stark. I mean, there's a whole palette of colors that would work on a colonial style, but they don't have to be in your face white. So, I mean, you can have gray tones, you can have, just beige, very soft white tones that would be, not attention-getting.
I have to say I'm a little more confused because as the note taker here, I'm trying to figure out how we would deal with the judgment that a building is built in a language that would therefore be able to be permitted to be white. I don't know. Okay, Marianne has an idea.
That's a question. Are there any Monterey adobes traditionally, for example, that have been painted anything else but white?
Yes, Steinbeck.
Yeah.
Steinbeck's sister's house
Was traditionally a different color.
Yeah, but it hasn't been painted in a long time, and so it's a soft. Steinbeck's sister's house down in the rectangle there. That house is white, but it is not stark white. It's it hasn't been painted in a long time, so it's very soft. A color that blends with all the trees and so forth that are there on the house. So but I haven't seen in my walking at least, I haven't seen a colonial house that's been painted in a while.
This was painted recently?
Yeah, no. Most of them are very soft and non non-problematic, I'll just say, or problematic because the color has so softened because of weathering that it actually looks quite okay, even next to Tudor style and little cottages and so forth down in that block.
This may just be a topic that where you just state the intent and that you don't regulate, with a codify, and you have to, it's paint. At the end of the day, I mean, this is funny that I didn't know that a colorful house, I mean, as long as I can remember, and I've been in town over 30 years, it's been that way, but that it's been even longer that way, that is really remarkable. But I think it's also the big exception. Most houses change color when they change ownership or just over the years. And you might just say that this is the intention, and that fad with the black and white, when this has flushed out from the magazines, will be the next color, will be en vogue. So
I think it's very possible those White Houses are going to get painted. Don, you're going to say something?
I think just as we disallow intense colors, we could eliminate stark whites. I'm against ruling out white.
No,
it's the starkness is the problem.
No, I agree.
Is there a Pantone color or something that we could, is there a darkness scale that we want to say, like, because, or is it just going to be the planning commission that says, okay, that's not stark?
Yeah, I mean, from a staff sort of implementation perspective, I'm definitely in the same camp as Marianne. I think that we need to state intent and leave that to the discretionary process. I think if we start talking about Pantone colors and whose definition of, you know, bright white is brighter than the other person's bright white, and yeah, that would be from a staff perspective, I think we should keep it as intent. You know, the one thing that we wrote down about diversity along the street, that's easy enough to implement. You can just look and see if it's a diversity of colors, but getting into that level of specificity, I think, is difficult, and we should just regulate intent on color.
Good, thank you. All right. I'm not sure, because I don't have my page open to it, where that appears in here, but we'll find it, we'll track it down, and we'll make it reflect this discussion. 5-minute break. Oh, wait, we have a new speaker. Hold on one second. Then we're going to take a little break.
My name is Stefan, and I love physics. So a comment on the purpose of color. Lighter color reflect the light. So if you live in a hot climate, like in Spain, they had 38 Celsius yesterday, you need white color to reflect the light and keep the house cold or cool. But over here, we don't have that problem. We actually need darker color so we can capture as much sunshine and energy as we can to keep the houses warm. So really, there's no practical purpose of having white colors or very light colors in this climate that we have here, unless, of course, you have to comply with the style. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Stefan. Okay, so we've heard a request for a break. How about we break for 5 minutes and come back, or 10 minutes, 5, 10, somewhere in that range. Come back at 5 of? Yeah? 5-ish.
10:55.
Thank you.
Awesome. I really appreciate it. Just to get a little feedback and information how to get started.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
Awesome.
he's really savvy on this stuff.
Cool, thanks.
You've already replaced, was it Sebastian?
No, we haven't. So Joel's the one running it right now. He's the department director. We're still working on filling Sebastian's position. So Joel's downstairs right now doing all this.
Hello, everybody. I think we're going to start to ramp up. Hello, Zoom world. Okay. So color is good. We're doing pretty well on time. It's not lightning speed, but we're doing okay. So I think we're going to keep going up the list. We could potentially cross out, if everyone agrees, on the buildable envelope, because we're going to hear more from staff. Yeah, no, I will go. Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to make my list shorter.
I would suggest we hold on that one.
So hold on the buildable envelope until we get more from staff on that, if that's okay. So then before that, though, we have this authentic versus faux human-made materials. And that is also mostly in section 4, for those of you following in your document. Toward the end of section 4, there's a 4.3 and there's a 4.4 about materials. And the 4.4.0 is where we had the discussion about human-made, we're calling them, or manufactured materials. We've had a lot of discussion about this. I'm not sure it really rises to the level of needing a ton of resolution on it, but Marianne hasn't been at these meetings for most of these, so I just want to make sure she got a chance to weigh in and see if we are feeling like this is resolved or not. I'm not sure that there's, oh yeah, no, we've taken care of the plastics issue. This was something that came up before. So the 4.4.1 basically says things need to be, dismantleable, recyclable, biodegradable. We don't call out non-toxic. We don't call out petroleum products, but maybe we could add that and should. So I'm getting some nods that we should make it clear that, plastics that, not talking about inside people's homes, but on the outside of people's homes. But Marianne, do you want to say any words on this? I'm approaching you.
Okay. Well, I think that would be very good. Since we have a plastic bag ban, it would be really appropriate to not have plastic building materials. I think we have very few membrane roofs, but you might want to address that also. There are some membranes that are just less environmentally damaging than others and are more fireproof than others. So we shouldn't get into the details, but it's just a thought of if we address plastics that we might want to address that as well. I read through these different points, Victoria, that you sent me in regards to, I really like the idea of manufactured materials better than man or human made or whatever it was. I think manufactured materials is a good term. There were a couple things.
I just pointed her toward 4.4.
Yeah. And I have, I wanted to look at 4.3.5. It says use metal or unclad wood windows. What's the reason why you wouldn't want to have a clad wood window? It's the same as a metal window?
Let me explain, because you did miss that part. We had a fairly good discussion, a fairly long discussion about that. That was just an italicized stab, and we changed it. We didn't, nothing again has been updated, but what we decided was that we would handle the problem of cladding, which is recyclability, by basically asking that if the window is clad, that it have, an ability to be separated out for recyclability. So that was that was the concern, is that we're trying to be an environmentally friendly, and sometimes cladding is fused in such a way that it really cannot be. And then there were some folks around the table who thought, I think they are separating it now, and I actually had a homework assignment check with the dump or whatever, see what they're doing, see. But that is a way we thought we'd handle that. So cladding only if, and it was also only going to be metal cladding as opposed to plastic cladding.
That's good. Yeah, they're just really good clad products out there. And then I had a question on 4.4.1. What is an material whose ecological impacts are equivalent to those of natural materials? How is that possible?
I think see the colon and then the explanation of what that means. So you have to read, I think you have to read the whole thing.
Yeah, it says able to form a natural patina over time. Pretty much everything does if you don't maintain it. Able to be maintained rather than disposed. I mean, any kind of material I think you can maintain, right?
Vinyl windows, no, not really. They just crack and discolor and you throw them away.
Well, we're already forbidding vinyl, so that wouldn't be an issue anymore. So I don't know what else that could be. Able to be fully dismantled and recycled and reused, yeah. Biodegradable and environmental non-toxic or beneficial. None of that explains to me how a man-made material can be ecologically equal to a natural material. It doesn't make sense to me, that's all.
Yeah, maybe there's another way to totally,
You could just say use man-made materials if they are ecologically sensitive, and then colon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of what you're explaining.
Yeah.
So rather than saying
equivalent. So maybe that's the wrong word.
Sensitive.
Yeah, ecological or, yeah, okay.
And I did find sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
I went back. I knew that I'd written it down. I did find what we came to on the windows. We did it as part of the commercial guidelines, so it's 4.3.5 in there. We changed it to use clad aluminum wood or unclad wood windows, doors, and garage doors, not vinyl or plastic. So that's what we came up with.
And I think we also did have a discussion anyway about checking on the recyclability, and that, if there is a product where you can't recycle it, then you should choose the one where you can in terms of cladding. So that's in there too. Hold on, let me get you the mic.
Just question, Marianne, you would maybe know. I just wonder if there's already like green building standards that people who know an awful lot about this topic have already researched and been building over time, rather than us trying to make them up on this table, like LEEDs, houses, and stuff like that.
Yeah, so that's in here too. You don't have it in front of you, David, but this is, we're basically saying if you do a cradle-to-cradle rated product, then you will meet Carmel standards. So that's 4.4.2. We can make it some other way, but
I meant like not our own standards. If we're
it's called cradle-to-cradle. It's a certification. Yes, it's a certification mechanism. And you can, basically it's a default. If you use that product, it's considered approved, we're asserting here, in Carmel. Certified cradle-to-cradle products.
And do you only want to go with cradle to cradle, or do you want to have other, like LEED, living building standards, they are so evolving, like LEED used to be the top of the line, then it was living building standards, then that it's just, I don't know how to have an overarching term for environmental certification that would hold up for a longer period of time, because these change so, the industry is changing so fast.
What I think I'm going right where you're going. I think we need to go back to stating the intent versus being specific, because I think, Marianne, you're right. This is a quickly evolving, and it's probably only going to evolve quicker as we get into more technology. So I don't think we want to lock the document into specific certifications. We need to state the intent. Like Melanie, that's what you were saying here. I'll give you the mic so you can.
No, you said it for me. I save time.
So I want to make sure that we're being clear. This is a fairly, this is not going to overall building standards like LEED or living green buildings, et cetera. This is about materials in particular. We could also talk about overall building ecological standards and simply say, follow the latest or whatever we decide to say. This particular, the reason cradle to cradle is in here, and again, it's not, I don't care. I mean, whatever we decide, but it's as a placeholder for something to certify materials, and also just something as a default. This is not saying you have to do it. It's just saying if you do that, we're going to let that, you'll be qualified. There may be another one. We could say certified cradle products and possibly other local, equivalent standards or more, So it's about materials versus overall building. Tell me what you think of that.
It's just if I go out and get already a LEED certification or living building standard, that is included already. So if then I read here that I have to then, in addition to already having the expense of getting something LEED certified, need to then myself submit all the documentation for cradle to cradle, I think that you could maybe either just have the material certification or the overarching certification should also take care of it. So therefore, if we start listing actual certifications, I think then we either have to list all of them and update them all the time, or just have an overarching term for an environmental certification.
So, current approved. So, but again, the question I was asking is, first of all, these are not required. We have not required this language here. We can talk about that. At this moment does not require it. It just says, we want you to use these kinds of materials, the ones you were talking about earlier. And by the way, if you meet an environmental standard that's already well accepted, then you sail through on that account. We're not going to check. So if you tell us, if you show us that you did all cradle to cradle, then yeah, you'll meet the standard that Carmel would like. That's a material standard. We could also add, and this may be what you're saying, Marion, is an overall building standard, that we encourage it, that we want you to meet it. I don't know. Go ahead.
Because that's embedded. Your cradle and cradle would be embedded in there.
I know. I'm asking whether we want to move from a material standard, like please use great materials, and if you use cradle to cradle or some other current professional approved product standard, then your products are fine, your materials are fine. But you're adding another question. You're adding, yes, you could also tell the building department, by the way, I'm building a LEED building. And then they should understand, here's what you're saying, that your materials, therefore, are also compliant. So do you want to add, I think you're proposing that you want to add an overall building standard as also a way to sail through the material choice issue. I think that's what you're saying. Not just materials themselves, certification program like carpet, but also overall LEED programs, living building programs. You want to add that, I think, is my interpretation of what you're saying. Not by name, but as a concept.
Yes, as a concept, but the only reason I'm bringing that up is that I think it may be not advantageous to call out a specific certification like cradle to cradle, but to replace it with a term that's a little overarching and achieves the same thing, so that we're not bound by this particular.
Okay. And so this is a grammatical correction. So you can simply say certified professional, the latest thing, such as perhaps cradle to cradle, LEED, blah, blah, blah.
Brandon, you have words for that.
That's very generous of you to assume that. Yeah, I think that we just kind of like hash that all up, like, certified professional.
Current, right?
Current, yeah. Yeah, I think all those words are good words. And then I think if we throw in a couple of such as but not limited to, then that would be good. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so, and we're saying materials and building programs, environmental materials and overall building standards, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's true. Good point.
Would that eliminate the need for saying things about
Would it eliminate the thing? Not necessarily, I don't think, because there are also, so David's asking whether that would eliminate the necessity to talk about cladding for windows, et cetera.
Lead building, can't you?
Vinyl windows on a lead building, says Brandon. It's hard to believe. That would be sad.
Considered that, so I'm not very well versed.
I think they might. I think you might actually be able to. Maybe not.
Maybe if they're recycled vinyl or something.
And they're like 100-year window.
We don't want to know. We just want to. We want a higher standard if that's the standard.
I think the cladding, like that whole wood, thank you. The whole wood and cladding thing is so important. I would suggest we just leave that in there. Let that kind of stand for itself.
So, but okay, so that's good. We've got the environmental thing. There was another issue about faux and authentic, we're calling it human-made, maybe manufactured materials. And that is, and so look at that. Where is that? Apply materials using, oh yeah, so do not use manufactured materials that fake natural or other materials in their textures or finishes, and apply these materials in a manner that conveys a traditional human scale. So we're asking the same thing of the scale for any kind of manufactured material as we would of any material. That was the question we had for you, Marianne, is the faking of a texture that is natural onto a manufactured product. Marianne and I have had a conversation about how what's wonderful about concrete, even though I know that some of the traditionalists might not agree with this, but is that it can take on the properties of its formwork. So this may be more of a commercial thing, but you can have you can choose a beautiful type of wood like cypress that has a deep grain, and then fill a wall, make a concrete wall, and have what looks like a wood wall actually, but it's made of concrete. But it's using individual true pieces of wood that are not fake from a computer to make an impression on the concrete. That is a rich artistic tradition in concrete formwork, and so there may be some appendices or
That's not a foam material. It's not pretending to be wood.
Okay, so let's talk. Let Marianne.
I agree. It's just it's very difficult to define, right? There's really good concrete wood shingles, for example. There's concrete roof shingles that are actually meant to look like wood shingles, and they're really good. So it's, but then, it's and it's. Mm-hmm. So it is such a difficult subject. Then I did a very big projects with clients who really love the large reclaimed stones, but they were very environmentally conscious, and also they really didn't like the idea of depleting all the historic resources from French castles and Jerusalem temples, and bringing it here so that we have a nice living room floor. So what we decided is, do concrete we had a couple really big slabs of these gorgeous old stone floors, and we cast concrete, and everyone thinks it's a real stone floor. I mean, they look beautiful, and they didn't, go and had demolish somebody else's old home in a different country, just so that we can have a nice stone floor here. So it's such a difficult subject. I don't know how I think, again, you can state the intent. I don't know that my language skills are good enough to even attempt that, but I want to just point out that that's not so clean cut, and then it is, I think it's really good. These concrete shingles are really good, and somebody else may think that brick vinyl siding looks just dandy too, and that's an extreme. But when it comes to stone, for example, I think these stone things that they put on that's supposed to look like stone for facades look terrible, but there's really people who don't see the difference. So it's such a difficult subject matter because of that. So I'm not very helpful. I just want to point out that it's very difficult to regulate.
So I think one of the things that this topic helps me with is that concrete in general is an exception. Concrete is an ancient material used, popularized by the Romans, right? And there are many, many examples, stone coping that look like limestone that are very good. And you would argue, if you don't want to mine the side of a mountain, maybe this is ecologically preferable for things like that. One of the thoughts I had was that the difference between texturing concrete with an actual organic piece of wood versus a computer pattern or a manufactured pattern might be a way to distinguish. So when you cast concrete to either show the formwork of cypress or to perfectly mimic limestone by the fact that it's porous and the pore is exactly right, that's one. Maybe there's a distinction we can make there, but there are a lot of faux materials, some of which you've brought in here, Brandon, that are not concrete faux. Mm-hmm. Metals that are look like wood, plastics or petroleum products made to look like wood. I think maybe we could agree, might be my direction, that if we're making an exception, it should be for concrete, which can perform just like stone. And the Flanders Mansion is the quintessential example.
If the group agrees that we're putting no petroleum products in there, then that wipes out a lot of those right out of the gate. Like, you're not going to have plastic slate, even though it may look fine. It's just it won't weather the same because it's plastic. Concrete is based in natural materials. Also, concrete is an amalgamation of natural materials. So, I think that's the difference there.
Aren't we just also talking about the quality of how something is done? I mean, there are cheap things, and then there are more expensive that look more natural, and I'm just thinking that, you know, the man-made products, many of them that we've been talking about, there's a whole range of quality and a range of price, and when you're talking about using something that's not natural, concrete's natural. I mean, I believe that it's a very positive product, and so much can be done with it. And I think that if you spend more money, you're going to get a better outcome, a better product, generally speaking. So maybe the debate about some of this stuff also has to go back to, like we say in the design guidelines, we want quality, we want authenticity. So I think these two concepts, these words, these adjectives, you know, are extremely important. And I think we also need to see some of this stuff. I keep saying that because I am not familiar with it. We all depend on you and Don and I was just getting ready to say Victoria when you did that. I was going to break your arm. I just have no problem. I think one of my favorite buildings downtown is Seven Arts. One of my other favorite buildings is Flanders. You know, and so I think it can be done very well. And I like your older house. I think is that the one that's on Torres, or is that where you're living now? No. Yeah, I mean, there the concrete there is very, very attractive. So, you know.
So I'll throw out one example. I didn't actually. This is a photo on my phone of Carmel stone paving, actual Carmel stone. And the light had changed so much, I was going to bring this to the group, that I couldn't follow up with the fake Carmel stone pavers that I saw on the other block. So I was going back to it, and then the light was gone, and I couldn't take a photo. But the fake ones are horrible, and the real ones are great. And they're concrete, the fake ones. So we have to, and I think they're bad because they're probably not cheap, by the way. I think they're bad because they are, the pattern that's stamped on them is a manufactured pattern. That's my guess. And that the way they're dyed, it's not a handcrafted product, even though it's concrete. Concrete is often very labor intensive and handcrafted. In fact, here's another beautiful example of a house for sale. There's a pavement in this, this is on Taurus. It's just somebody's patio, and it's somebody went ahead and put little pebbles in the grout lines, and there's aggregate that matches the grout lines, and it's just very charming and pretty, and you'll pass it around. Somebody handcrafted that concrete. And it's very different. It's very artistic, it's very human scaled, and it's very different than that manufactured, stamped, fake Carmel stone. So maybe there's something there that we can describe, the craftedness of it.
Well, we say that throughout.
Can I borrow that real quick?
Yeah.
So one of the things I've noticed too over the years is the human-made materials that are the best are the ones that come in individual pieces. So you can install them in individual pieces versus a stamped block of individual, it looks like individual stones, but when the foam material is made as an individual piece, like the hardy boards or like individual stones or like Marianne's example of the individually cast units that then you can lay, and they don't get stuck in a formulaic sort of pattern that was put together by a machine. So that there may be something there too the committee wants to explore, adding that in, that, you know, for like, I think we're circling around some things, right? That there's a quality, that the faux materials can be installed in individual pieces, not as a group that's manufactured that way. So you may want to consider that, again, getting to intention and guiding the user to how they apply that material versus just all out saying no, or getting too specific about what materials are good and bad. Just like, what is it about a material that's human made that makes it look better?
And I think we might end up adding a little 0.5 or whatever, 0.5 about concrete in particular. So I think that's been a good discussion. I don't know, this is again, food for revisions so that we can then see what we think about maybe a semi-final version of some of this stuff. Yes. Well, I think it's the same language, but please be the reminder person that we always have to do it everywhere. Yep. We'll make it consistent for the town, I think, for materials. If we're moving up the list, I just want to check in on this one, even though I think it might be resolved. This is the multi-lot downtown building strategy that Dawn spoke so eloquently about, and I think there was consensus around the room. Marianne wasn't there, I don't think, but this is the question of whether, when you have a larger lot downtown, what is the architectural strategy? What is the architectural language strategy? And the group, I believe, wants to stick with the Carmel tradition of a fine, integrated, well-scaled, but integrated building like Auberge or like the library, or, you know, a cohesive architectural thought for larger buildings. But I'll let you weigh in, Marianne. I'll put you on the spot. You don't want to.
What's the name again of the development on San Carlos and 6th? You know, when they did that development, how it's yes, McFarland.
McFarland.
Where it's over the top of the garage?
Yeah. No, it's a large lot, but it doesn't have a grandiose feel of one large building. It reads as separate little, you know. Yeah, there's a Tudor one and yada yada, but it's broken up. Oh, Marianne, you know, across from Chase, directly across from Chase. Yeah, you know. Yeah, so something like that. Yeah, it's broke, yeah, it's, the stiles are like broken up so that it doesn't look massive. Yeah, yeah.
Were you about to say something, Doug, on this? No. Anyone from the Zoom room on the multi-lot downtown building strategies? Okay, I don't see anybody. Okay, I mean, that was just a check-in for that one because we did have a good long discussion about that. Now this one was recently introduced. The next one up the list is the third design guideline sort of volume for public spaces, and Doug was kind enough to work on that and try to assemble, but I think we only got one, and then I typed it up for him. So this is just breaking news. It's just another stab at seeing if we can do this in following the same 6 principles. So all this is so far, Brandon, and it really needs tons of work.
It's on my side eye.
Yeah, this is on, this morning on my way over here at 8:30, I put this up on the website, the steering committee website. This is just the part, we talked about this at the last meeting, where we take the elements from the commercial design guideline and the residential guideline that deal with public property. Because nobody is going to ever be laying asphalt in this town in the residential district besides the city and its contractors. Private property owners are hopefully not going to be repaving the street. So we thought, Doug had this idea, and maybe, I think there were no objections whatsoever, that maybe we should center all those public property related sidewalks, streets, park, sort of mini parks and stuff in the civic, or what is currently called public, muni. We haven't decided what to call it. And so I did the formatting of extracting the stuff from the residential, extracting the stuff from the commercial that relates to public space. And then we had been given, I don't remember what this document is called, with all these curb details. One public works document that has curb details, right-of-way standards or something. And, I, again, just tried to distribute them through. There's no changes other than grammar, and just trying to put things kind of where they might go in our normal format. I think it's worth, we can't do it today, but this is now on the website, and we can see if this is worth doing. We think it was worth trying. That was what the community wanted to try. It certainly doesn't it only has those 3 documents in it now, combined now, the residential, the commercial, and this one public right-of-way detail document. There may be others that should belong here.
Push that to another. Yeah. I think we should push this one to another meeting then, since no one except for you and Doug have seen this, I guess.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But I wanted to let you know that it's here. It's on our list of discussion. We were going to discuss, we already knew we wanted to try it, so the potential of it isn't really the right phrasing. Potential third design guideline for public spaces. The question is how to do it for another time. How to do it. Does it work? Are there other parts of the city documentation that are floating around that would be better if they were brought together in one place? And that was our hope, that would help, but we'll see. So that, I just wanted you to know that was ready, or not ready, it's far from ready, but there's an outline basically of a first stab. It's on the steering committee website, and of course it could be distributed for a future meeting once we get a chance to buy into that. So that's that for today, unless anyone has any comments on that particular topic. Yeah? Good progress, maybe? We'll see. Okay, now we're going to move up to the clump that has to do, and we have half an hour, so maybe we'll do it, has to do with things that Brandon and I both thought were going to have impacts on code, and therefore our comments on it really would not make their way into the design guidelines, but may help, thoughts about how to handle the code situation, and some of them are guideline related. So if we start from, we could keep starting from the bottom, this idea of compounds and how they could, I have to say, I had just personally a kind of weird epiphany about this because all of a sudden, things have changed so much in America in terms of concentration of wealth. All of a sudden, it occurred to me somebody could, and already has to a little bit of a degree, someone with enough money could certainly buy a city block of Carmel. No problem. And they could, in our current legal framework, and even with a reformed legal framework, they could remove all the buildings from that and basically undermine the 40-foot lot frontage rhythm that we have that is part of, I think, our heritage. I had never thought of it before as one of the treasures of Carmel: the trees, the beach, the beautiful grid, the scale of the town. The scale of the town is maintained by the 40-foot lot widths.
How would they undermine that?
You would undermine it by removing all the buildings and just putting one building. And all of a sudden, you walk through on one block. You could do it.
Isn't that cool?
So you wouldn't be able to build across property lines. They'd have to merge all the lots, which the city most likely would not approve. Yeah.
That's fine. Let's say someone just wants to knock down.
They could knock down all the buildings and build on one of the 4,000 square foot lots. Yes. I don't want to freak people out that you can. Yeah.
No, right. And so then, would that be okay? So you, instead of having a rhythm of walking past 10, is it 10 or do we say?
Roughly 10 per street
per side.
Yeah.
So instead of so when we experience Carmel, and the reason that humans like human-scaled things is that we relate to the rhythm. It speeds our journey. If you're walking through a parkland, that's a different type of journey. That's a contemplative, long. It's not as active of a procession. If you go past at a given rhythm, 10 houses per block that are 40 feet on center apart from each other, that's a certain rhythm. That's the rhythm envisioned by the founders of the town.
Let me add something else to that.
But if someone eliminates all those buildings,
there's actually one other piece of code that you're not allowed to. The city will not approve a demolition permit unless you have an application to build a house. You can't demolish a house without having a plan to build something back on it. So you wouldn't be able to demolish all of those lots without having a plan to rebuild something on them. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's good new information, and that's always been the case.
As far as yeah.
So we do not have the opportunity. So if I was somebody who wanted to have a swimming pool next to my house, and there was a building there before, I could not replace the building with a swimming pool.
You could.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
you have to have some sort of project.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what if my project is a playground for my children on one and a bocce ball court on the other? So a patio, a garden, a tennis court. Okay, so then the problem does exist. The problem does exist of removing the feeling of occupation of every 40 feet of a structure.
Victoria, we have a park in the middle of town. We have a park in the middle of town. And I think that if somebody wanted to green a whole block, it's only good for the environment. I mean, I think it's a very theoretical thing anyway, but in terms of, yeah, you can address taking away housing space and all these are different issues. But from a design and an architectural issue, to just make one block like a green, and it's good for more fresh air and for more views for the neighbors, and I would think it could only be beneficial for the neighborhood. So if somebody wants to take that on, I really don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Suggest a park for the pit. So I have to say I strongly disagree. I think when you think about the great parks of America, you think about Central Park, which only works because it's in contrast with the skyscrapers around it. When you think about the way we design public projects even in a small town like Carmel, the positioning of Devendorf, the positioning of the Mission Trails Park, the positioning of the playground and at the tennis court area, those are all, you know, I'm not accounting for how they got decided, but they are occupying deliberated or intentional locations in our town. The idea that the founders of the town, who zoned one zone commercial and the rest of it residential surrounding it, would say, no, it would be okay if it's residential or parkland. I think that we have parks. If we want to deliberately, as a community, create more parks for public use, then yes, I would be in favor of adding green space in a strategic way. The idea that a trillionaire could come in here and buy up these blocks and decide, no, this is a tennis complex or this is a swimming complex or whatever, I think is a actual real danger to this town and to the heritage of those 40-foot rhythm that we all love walking through. The reason, in my opinion, that people walk around this town all day is because of that 40-foot rhythm. So I think of it as a preservation issue, but maybe I'm in the minority, and I'm going to just give it to David real quick, and then you, Marianne.
I was just going to say that I think that you've got a really good point there. There's some concern. One of the things that might be good is if we could, on a code level, change it so that it's not just any structure, but a dwelling. And when we talk about housing element, you know, how we need to provide housing and stuff like that, use our land well, that could be a part of it.
Historically, there were a lot of examples where in the old days people built over property lines, and we have had many examples which have disappeared. Like we had a fantastic, wonderful Brocathlo house that was built over 3 or 4 lots on San Antonio, which was torn down, and now we have 4 cookie cutter, really not so good houses that went up instead. So I would have much rather preferred this house to be, you know, go over 4 lots. Then it right across the street, Gretchen's, what was her inn called? She sold it, I think, and now it's private. But it's the same thing, built over, it was a traditional place, and it had been built over 4 lots. And then this really nice, much more generous place gets torn down because they're traditional lot lines, and then you get it stuffed with these, you know, cookie cutter houses, these Carmel cottages. You know. So I don't think you can blanket state that there's a lot of precedent of larger compounds in town that are very nice as an ensemble in the whole town. So.
I think this is good. This is another problem. I don't think it's the same. One does not preclude the other. We have the possibility of a danger going really badly in the other direction and also in that other direction. I think it's 2 separate problems. They both probably need to be dealt with, and that's the point of this discussion. Compounds in both directions, beautiful properties that were well done as larger versions, like the Hess mansion, like the barn red stuff I talked about earlier. So we do need to, but there's a problem that's coming. That's okay. Go ahead. Sorry, Melanie.
No, I was just gonna comment about the cookie cutter idea. I mean, and the Countess's property, and that whole portion of Torres Street is just an abomination what they've done there. And the same thing on the way out of town into Pebble Beach along San Antonio. I don't know how you guys feel, but I think that something was really wrong with the city when they allowed that to happen. Instead of having 2 or 3 lovely houses, we've got all this botch there. I mean, that's not what Carmel is when you come into the city, is that kind of lack of planning. And likewise with Torres. I just think we don't want that. We want a combination. Like the White House that I love so much on 13th and Casanova, that was 4 lots, you guys. It had tremendous trees, tremendous canopy, and so forth. And it was that way for many, many years. And then the people died, and they saw sugar plums because they've got 4 lots. But luckily, the people who bought it used 3 of the lots for their white house. And the trees went, the White House was built, and there's 1 vacant lot, but it doesn't have water, so it's just empty. But I think you need to have a little bit of variety in a block. I can't stand in my walking just seeing one 40 by 100, lot, just all stacked up. I lived in Manhattan Beach, and I cannot abide having beach towns where these little lots just, and that wasn't, the big lots were tradition also in Carmel. I mean, in the old days, the Bohemian days, a lot of people, who were wealthier, they bought what they could, as many lots as they could sometimes. And then, of course, Devendorf catered to teachers, professors, artists and so forth who couldn't afford anything more than a small lot. And I think what works in town is there's kind of a variety. It's when the big lots get broken up into cookie cutters that, it's so un-Carmel.
Cherry Foundation is another one. It's a compound. It's a compound, and it's great.
Victoria's going the other way, though. She's going not from a big to a bunch of small. She's going from having smalls to having someone create a big private park across from your house. Yeah.
But I do not understand the logic while the old compounds that we have in town are great and a new one should be bad. I don't get the logic of that.
Well, I think it's size. It's size.
The same thing.
No, we're talking about 4 lots. If you have someone buy a whole block, there's 20 lots. There's a big difference. And that's what's happening in Palo Alto and Saratoga and Menlo Park. People are buying. I was in Palo Alto. I was living there when Zuckerberg bought up property to build his compound.
No, I understand what you're saying. What happened next door to me is these people, speaking of compounds, but this is a small scale, but it certainly irritated a lot of people. Next door to me was a good size lot and a half, and the husband died, and the woman had another little house in town that she'd done, a darling cottage, really quintessentially Carmel, everything. And so when he found out it was for sale, he and his wife had bought the old Mitchell house 2 doors down from me, and another quintessential Carmel cottage. And they already own like 4 other houses in Europe and in the United States, in Carmel and in California. So they decided that when this house next door to me came up for sale, they wanted a compound for their family. And so he makes $35 million a year, and he can afford anything that he wants. So when my friend and neighbor had her house up for sale, it didn't even go on the market. He just came over and he said, I'll give you $1 million more for that house because I want to build a compound. Well, these people, and it's Doug's right, these people, many of them who are coming into Carmel have more money than Croesus, and they're buying up property because it's such a great investment. Our property here in Carmel never goes down. It just keeps going up. In fact, most of us around this table probably wouldn't be able to live here if we hadn't purchased property years ago. There is this possibility. And I wouldn't be surprised if for their other son they decided that they were going to buy the house next to that. So they'll never get mine. So, but they keep going down the block, and of course they're never here. They're never. It's just a place to park money. They're never around. They're only here like once a year.
Can I correct something I said?
Go ahead, yeah.
Thanks. So I had to check my facts, thank you, on the whole conversation about the pool and all that. So what happened with that one specifically was that lot was actually merged with the house next door to it, because the rule that I said is true. You can't demo a house without building a house back up on the same lot. So as we've all talked about, the current municipal code does actually encourage lot mergers, which is something we've talked about, that we're talking about getting rid of that. Yeah, so that is, for a lot of reasons, but that's something we're looking at taking out in this code update. But when that was processed, it was merged, the lot with the pool, and there's actually a guest house with the pool too. So it's a pool guest house merged with the lot next to it that had the main residence. So that's how that happened, because you have to build a house specifically. So you can't build, so to answer your question about like a bocce ball court, you can't demo a house and build a bocce ball court on a legal lot of record. You have to have a plan for building a house.
And you cannot keep it vacant. How do you regulate that?
Well, that's the trick, right? So you can't force somebody to build a house. Yeah, so they would have to have plans that go through and get approval from the planning commission. If they don't build it, we don't have anything in our code that says, you didn't build the plans that we approved, so now you're in trouble. It could theoretically, but they have to go through the trouble of designing a house that gets approved by the planning commissions. That's right. So the building plans for the house would have to get approved. They could demo and then just stop the project and never build their house. We don't have any way to force somebody to build a house. But that's obviously a lot of trouble to go through for, in this exercise, 20 lots, design 20 houses, go through 20 planning commission hearings, get 20 building permits approved, all that stuff. So it's, take that for what it's worth. Yeah.
That's an exaggerated example.
So if you do combine lots, so people are talking about 4 lots combined. I know what the site coverage rules were since I only have 1 lot. I certainly don't know what they are if you have like a 16,000 square foot lot. Does it just scale exactly like individual houses? So maybe the topic we're not talking about with respect to site coverage, maybe it shouldn't scale linearly with the size of the lot.
So it doesn't scale in a linear fashion. Our code actually, there's a whole rubric and table in the code about lot coverage, because we do have some lots that are 24,000 square feet. If you go down like the far northwest corner of town, actually the part that's outside the gate, some of those lots are 23,000 square feet. So no, it doesn't scale exactly. So it's not like you go exponentially the same. So it does start to draw back as you get a bigger lot. But that is something to consider as well, these bigger lots.
And again, if you can't merge, if that's on the table, that merging lots is no longer legally encouraged or potentially not allowed at all, then that question you asked would be moot, because that wouldn't happen.
As far as the merger goes, what we've talked about is that right now our code encourages people to merge lots, which, just from my seat as a planning director, I think is a bad idea. I think that there are instances in land use where a merger is the right course, but it should be more of an entitlement. Like you have to go through the process like a variance, the very specific findings that have to be made in order to get that entitlement, versus, hey, we really want people to merge your lots. It's just an over-the-counter thing, which it is.
So, I think there's a fascinating discussion. We're talking about all these different dangers that we have seen or previewed a little bit, with just the money coming in as one direction. And then the maximizing your profit by taking, there's that picture where I took of the concrete with the pebbles in it. That's a house that's for sale on Taurus next to the Hess mansion. Beautiful property. Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. And it's huge. It's an enormous property. Now, obviously the temptation is for someone to buy that and try to make it into a bunch of lots. Maybe you could do that in a sensitive way, but that's another danger because of the developer mindset, right? We are supposed to be an individualistic set of property owners. And if you build a project that's really 5 projects and we build them all at the same time, it's going to be pretty hard unless you commission different architects for that and you have a competition or whatever. But if you have a business to build homes and you have 5 in a row, you're going to struggle to make those fit our standards, I think. variety and sort of individuality and artistry. So we have problems on both sides of this lot size issue. And we have 10 minutes, and I'm not sure that we can resolve them all in the next 10 minutes, and we're not going to get to the rest of the list, but we did very well today. So I don't know. So now what we've got from Brandon is this lot merges issue, which is on the code side, and how that could help deal with this issue.
But
yeah, go ahead.
That's just something, we talked about this earlier on. There's code updates we're doing that are related to design guidelines, and there's code updates we're doing that are just zoning code updates. From a staff perspective, that's one we're going to take that forward. We're recommending taking that out. I mean, that decision's kind of made. So if the steering committee wants to weigh in on that, that's fine, but we're going to be proposing that the lot mergers go away.
Agreement around the table. So you're not going to get like torches at the front of City Hall on that one. But this idea of the opposite that Marianne raised, of you have these beautiful larger properties, and if there's a temptation to come in and turn them into a little development, a little mini development. Oh yeah, David.
Yeah, as an investor, I understand that attraction, definitely. I mean, I'm doing a restoration project that I technically would have loved to tear it down and build, a much bigger home, but make more money with a new house. But that was never my intention. But I was wondering, before we go, can we have a little bit of an update on the DRB, because that's such a tasty little treat for a lot of us.
We might not have time. So we have this, we have two other items we have to adjourn. We really do have this future agenda items. Maybe that's what we need to do right now, is basically move to this. I feel like this discussion of compounds has raised some even more issues than originally inspired the topic. And so I think we should start again there. And we basically did all the G's. So if we could do the C's at one more meeting, that leads to item 6, which is future agenda items. Do folks think that this is the next thing to do, is just to finish this list at the next thing, and then we can go to the Muni guidelines that just appeared out of nowhere this morning? Because that actually is, that's from the lower list. Yeah? Yeah. It's the top one of the lower list. So basically come back to that. So we'll bracket.
That's kind of its own meeting.
Yeah.
We need to do the same treatment effectively that we did to the other two.
Possibly. You look, you see, it's really just the same stuff, but moved into its own volume. But we'll look. Yeah. But
I mean, the exercise of going around and let everyone.
Yeah, no, it'd be good to do.
I think we should.
Okay. So that's future agenda. Anyone else want to weigh in? We will get to DRB then, if we can do that. Anyone else have thoughts on future agenda items? Go ahead, Melanie.
I thought we were going to go through and deal with things like skylights and a variety of little things like that that we discussed, but I didn't feel that we got a real clear resolution of, like, we all agreed that we didn't want skylights, in the front facade, roof facade. But I'm not sure about if we want to say viewed from the right of way, no skylights where you can be viewed from the right of way. And there are a list of things that I kept that we had discussed and not met real clear resolution on, that I think that we definitely should go over, because there are things that come up every single project that comes through is almost all of them have skylights and where the skylights are located and so on and so forth. But that's just one out of like a dozen or so that we really should have some clear definition on before we, move too far afield.
So here's my thought on that from a process standpoint. I think that, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, Brandon and I have been taking copious notes about the full review of all the guidelines that we did over those 5 meetings. I think what you're talking about, Melanie, is needing to see that again to when those notes get incorporated into the next version, we then need to have folks be able to look at it and see that that the skylight thing is properly resolved. Now, maybe we will do that more, maybe not through a meeting. I don't think we're going to be able to go through the whole thing again, but maybe the parts that were altered.
Well, let me suggest, because the timing may actually be fortuitous that the city council couldn't hear and talk about the new sort of formatting, because what we can do is that gives us a month now between Victoria and I to run through all the information we gathered from those 5 meetings, update these 2 versions, put all that stuff in there, and then that'll be what goes to the city council. So let's make sure we get their buy-in, like we talked about, on the sort of new direction, and then we can run the exercise again and make sure that we took all those things to the umpteenth degree that we wanted to.
I just think that we all need to see one last time, all of us together, what we've done, so that when it goes to the council, guys, it's got to be the way we want it to be viewed.
We're not going to approve the final thing.
No.
This is just a check-in.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that when we decide to send this off, we have to be very sure that we have seen it and gone through it, and that we're happy with what it says and how it says it, and that it's, that it's right, because we're not going to be, if we start opening things up for change just before or just after, or try to do something just after the council, there are going to be changes, I'm sure. I mean, that's a given. But we don't want our document to have changes that are pending and that we haven't resolved. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, and I agree with you, but I want to make sure that I'm very clear, because I felt strongly about this last time, and I still do, that the council still has not seen this new formatted version of this that we've done. So that meeting with the council is about them really seeing the new format, and make sure that we didn't go off the rails so far and they're like, hold on, no, we don't want this at all. So that's what the council meeting is more about, and not them blessing the final words or anything like that. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, so I think we have it set up to take care of your concerns. I know it's weird to have had all these discussions and not see it reflected in the document yet, but we will take care of that. We will make sure that there's the next pass, that where everything's picked up. We call it in architecture, you pick up the red lines and you make them, you revise. And so we'll do that. But first, before I wanted to work on that, I wanted to go through this deeper list. And so that, to me, was the sequence. But we will not leave that step out. And let's pick a date for the second, the upper half of this list, upper third. Yeah, I think that's right, given what we've done today. So, I don't know. We'll talk about it afterwards. She's saying the views thing is resolved, but I didn't think it was.
That on my bars.
That was an opinion. I don't think it was resolved, because Doug was doing some research on that.
Yeah, well, good. And then I saved it.
Yeah.
Well, if there's something different, because I thought that's where we went.
So let's save the conversation.
So what day works for you, Brandon?
You can bring the baby out? Yeah.
So that's the 11th? Thursday, May 11th. Everybody good with that? Anybody not good with that? At 9 a.m., Thursday, May 11th. I'm getting some thumbs up. That's good.
Hello?
At what time?
I'm hearing a hello. Is that from the Zoom room? But maybe someone unmuted. Okay. So this is
Yes.
steering committee. Next, we're going to continue this
Yes.
topic, but we will adjourn this meeting. I think there's no reason not to, but we're going to re-agendize, yeah?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think we'll do another special meeting, just do them as special meetings.
I did not. What address did he mail it to?
Tell Cindy to mute herself, Cindy Hunter.
Is Cindy Hunter could mute herself on the Zoom room?
Marianne, you good for the 11th?
No.
Marianne's good for the 11th?
I moved. I'm no longer in Texas.
You're good for the 11th at 9 a.m.? Okay, good. Nice conversation, everybody, today. I felt like we got a lot done. Very good brainstorming. Thank you. Appreciate it. Till next time.
That's correct, yes. No, I'm on the credit card, so that made my problem.